Why do we believe thoughts that hurt us? Why do we repeat patterns that make us feel small? And why does the voice in our head sometimes feel so certain, even when it's wrong? What are cognitive distortions? Really, there's a voice in your mind. It sounds like you. It speaks in your tone. It uses your memories. And sometimes it lies. Not in a loud, obvious way, but in a quiet, believable way. So believable, in fact, that you don't even notice it's lying at all. That's what makes cognitive distortions so powerful and so dangerous. They're not just negative thoughts. They're patterned habits of the mind, shortcuts your brain takes to simplify the world. And for a while, they helped. They gave you a way to anticipate pain, to make sense of confusion, to feel safer in a world that often isn't. But over time, those shortcuts became stories. And those stories started to define you. Stories like, if I'm not perfect, I'll be rejected. If I make a mistake, I'm a failure. If they didn't say anything nice, they must be disappointed. If I feel anxious, something bad must be about to happen. Cognitive distortions aren't flaws. They're survival strategies, carved deep into your mental wiring by experience, fear, and repetition. And the more they repeat, the more they feel like truth. But they're not. They're filters. They change what you see. They shape how you feel. And sometimes they trap you inside a version of reality that isn't really yours. This series is about gently noticing them, without judgment, without force, without trying to think positive over the top of your pain. It's about learning to see the distortion without becoming it. Because the moment you can name it, you create space around it. And in that space, clarity begins. Let's keep going. But why would your brain do this in the first place? Why would it twist your thoughts into something that hurts you? Maybe because your brain isn't trying to hurt you at all. Let's look at the next question. Why does your brain love to lie to you? Why would your own mind deceive you? Why would something designed to protect you also be the thing that holds you back? And why does the brain prefer a comforting lie over an uncomfortable truth? Your brain isn't built for truth. Not exactly. It's built for survival. And survival doesn't always require accuracy. It requires speed, efficiency, a way to make sense of chaos fast enough to stay safe. So the brain cuts corners. It uses past experiences to predict the present. It fills in blanks. It assumes. It jumps to conclusions. And over time, those assumptions turn into beliefs. Beliefs you never consciously chose. Because your brain isn't just trying to help you think. It's trying to help you feel safe. And if that means distorting reality just a little, it will. Let's say you were once rejected for speaking up. Now, every time you have something to say, your brain whispers, "Don't. They'll judge you." Is it true? Maybe not. But it feels safe because it matches what came before. This is how protective patterns form. Your brain links pain with memory and memory with prediction. And once it thinks it's figured out how the world works, it clings to those rules, even when the world has changed. That's why the voice in your head sounds so certain. Not because it's wise, but because it's familiar. Certainty is a survival tool. The more confident the brain sounds, the less threatened you feel, even if what it's saying is wrong. So when your thoughts say, "I'll never be good enough," everyone's thinking about my flaws. If I relax, everything will fall apart. They're not trying to punish you. They're trying to protect you, even if the method is flawed, even if it hurts you in the process. Your brain is always on your side, but it's not always right. And if you want to understand why distortions form, you have to understand what your brain values most: speed over nuance, familiarity over truth, safety over freedom. That's not failure, that's design. So the next time you notice a thought that feels harsh, that feels automatic, that feels rehearsed, ask yourself, is this truth? Or is this protection? Is this now? Or is this history repeating itself? Because once you stop taking every thought at face value, you begin to hear your mind differently. Not as an enemy, not as a guide, but as a system, trying, imperfectly, to keep you alive. Let's keep going. But if the brain relies on shortcuts to survive, where do those shortcuts come from? To understand the distortions, we have to go back to the beginning. Let's look at the origins of mental shortcuts. Where do your thoughts come from before you even think them? How does the mind decide what's safe? Before you get a chance to question it. Before you had language, you had reactions. Before you had thoughts, you had instincts. Before you had stories about the world, you had sensations in your body that told you what to expect. That's where shortcuts begin. Not in logic, but in survival. Your brain is constantly collecting data, not just about the outside world, but about you. What makes you tense? What makes you freeze? What makes you pull away, even before you understand why? And it learns, quickly, quietly, without asking for permission. This is why some of your strongest beliefs don't come from what people taught you. They come from what you felt over and over again, like being scolded for speaking up. So your brain learns silence is safer, or being overlooked when you were hurting. So it learns my feelings don't matter, or being praised only when you performed well. So it learns my worth is what I achieve. These are not thoughts, they're imprints, emotional rules your nervous system writes to help you move through the world with less risk. But emotional safety isn't the same as truth. And what kept you safe then might be keeping you small now. Because the brain doesn't stop to ask, is this rule still helping me? It just keeps applying it. And so, the shortcut repeats. You walk into a room full of kind people, but your body still says, they're judging you. You get close to someone good, but a voice says, be careful. This won't last. You try something new, but the tension in your chest says, this is dangerous. That's the echo of old shortcuts firing in a new life. And the longer they repeat, the more they turn into beliefs. And the more beliefs you carry, the harder it becomes to see the difference between reality and protection. So what do? We don't blame ourselves for the rules we once needed. We thank them. We see them. We soften toward them. Because these shortcuts, as limiting as they've become, are evidence of your resilience. They helped you get here, but they don't have to lead you forward. You get to choose differently now, not all at once, but gently, moment by moment. Let's keep going. But what's the cost of these shortcuts when they become habits? How much clarity do we lose in the name of feeling safe? Let's look more closely at the cost of efficiency in thought. What do we lose when the mind moves faster than understanding? What truths get buried beneath the need to feel certain and safe right now? Your brain has one mission: make sense of the world as quickly and safely as possible. And to do that, it builds shortcuts, heuristics, patterns, quick decisions based on past experience, not because it's lazy, but because it's efficient. But here's the cost. The faster your thoughts move, the less space you have for nuance, for slowness, for truth. Because truth, real, deep, human truth, is often complicated. It doesn't fit in headlines. It doesn't scream, it whispers. But shortcuts don't wait for whispers. They listen to the loudest thing. They search for familiar danger, even when it's not there. So you feel anxious in a room full of safety. You brace for rejection from someone who cares. You assume you're failing, not because you are, but because you've always expected to. That's the cost of efficiency. When your brain makes decisions before you're fully present, it protects you from pain, but also from possibility. You miss the moment, the softness, the chance to feel something new, because the shortcut already decided what this is, and who you are, and how this ends. You may not even notice it happening, because fast thoughts feel like instinct, like knowing, like certainty, but certainty isn't always wisdom. Sometimes it's just a habit wearing the mask of confidence, and confidence, without reflection, can turn into distortion. This is where so many cognitive distortions begin, not in malice, but in speed. You think, they didn't text back. I must have done something wrong. They're quiet. They're mad. I feel off. Everything must be falling apart. You don't pause. You don't check. You just fill in the gap with the first thought that shows up. That's the brain doing its job. But it's not always telling the truth. So what do? We slow down. We create space between stimulus and story, between feeling and conclusion, between reaction and reflection. We ask, is this the only possible meaning? Am I reacting to the past or to the present? What would I believe if I gave this a little more time? Because real clarity rarely comes fast. It arrives when you make room for it. Let's keep going. But even when you slow down, there's a voice that doesn't. The one that criticizes everything, that doubts every move, that never seems satisfied. Let's meet that voice. Let's meet your inner critic. Whose voice is it when the words in your mind turn against you? Why does it sound so familiar, so convincing, even when it hurts you most? There's a voice in your mind that always seems to have something to say. It tells you you're not doing enough. It tells you that rest is laziness, that your best wasn't really your best, that you should have known better, that you're behind. It doesn't yell. It doesn't beg for attention. It just waits, calmly, critically, for the moment you let your guard down. Why did you say that? Why are you still not over this? This is why people leave. That voice, that's your inner critic, and most people have one, but few people realize that it didn't come from nowhere. It was learned, built, layered over time, sometimes from words spoken to you directly, sometimes from things left unsaid, sometimes from trying to stay safe in an environment that didn't feel safe at all. It may have once served a purpose, to keep you out of trouble, to help you fit in, to push you toward perfection so no one could see your flaws. But over time, it forgot its job was to protect you, and started believing its job was to shrink you. Now it speaks in absolutes. It turns stumbles into failures. It turns feedback into personal attacks. It turns rest into guilt. You may have mistaken it for motivation, but its goal isn't growth. It's control. It wants to control how much you feel, how far you go, how much space you take up in the world. And the more you believe it, the quieter your real voice becomes. So what do? We don't fight it. We don't try to silence it with louder affirmations. We learn to recognize it, to name it, to separate from it, to speak around it. You can say, I hear you, but I don't have to follow you. You sound like fear, not truth. You want me to be small, but I've outgrown that version of myself. Because you don't have to believe every thought that uses your voice, especially the ones that hurt. Let's keep going. Sometimes the inner critic doesn't even finish its sentence. It just reacts instantly, like a reflex, like it knew what to say before the moment even happened. Let's take a closer look at the danger of mental reflexes. Let's explore why thinking fast can be dangerous. What if the danger wasn't in what you thought, but in how fast you believed it? And what if the real mistake was never the moment, but the reflex that came before it? Your brain is fast, faster than you realize. It makes decisions in fragments of a second. It notices patterns, tones, shifts in energy, long before your conscious mind catches up. It's not a flaw, it's evolution. Thousands of years ago, fast thinking kept you alive. It told you, that rustle means danger. That expression means threat. That silence means something's wrong. And so your brain learned to jump, to fill in the gaps, to complete the story before you even knew there was one. But survival isn't the same as truth. And in a modern world, full of nuance, context, emotion, thinking fast can mislead you. It can convince you that someone's mood is about you, that a delayed reply means rejection, that discomfort equals danger, that anxiety equals proof. Because fast thinking skips the pause. It skips the question. It skips the space where truth usually lives. And so, you react. You pull away before someone even lets you down. You shut down before the conversation even begins. You prepare for loss before it ever arrives. Not because it's happening, but because your mind predicted it. And here's the hardest part. The faster the thought, the more true it feels. Not because it is true, but because your brain has already moved on to what it thinks comes next. So what do? We slow the moment down. We catch the reflex before it becomes a belief. We say, what if this is just a guess? What if my fear is narrating this moment, not reality? What's the difference between what I know and what I'm assuming? This isn't about doubting every thought. It's about making room for the ones that arrive too fast to be trusted. Because your mind is powerful, but it's not perfect. And not every split-second judgment deserves your full attention. Let's keep going. But what happens when your thoughts don't come fast? They come constantly, not as instincts, but as spirals, as noise, as endless loops with no off switch. Let's look more closely at the psychology of overthinking. What if the mind doesn't shout, but just never stops talking? What if the danger isn't what you're thinking, but that you can't stop? And what if clarity isn't buried deep, but drowned beneath too many layers? There's a kind of tiredness that doesn't come from doing too much, but from thinking too long. Not thinking hard, not thinking well, just thinking endlessly, looping, spiraling, rehearsing conversations that never happened, fixing problems that don't exist yet, trying to prepare for every version of a future that may never come. This is overthinking. And unlike fear or anger or grief, overthinking doesn't feel like a visitor. It feels like you. It sounds like your voice. It speaks in your tone. It uses your memories as evidence. It tells you that if you just keep thinking, you'll finally feel better. But here's the paradox. The more you think, the worse you feel. Because overthinking doesn't solve emotions. It avoids them. It's your mind's way of saying, I don't know how to feel this, so I'll just analyze it instead. You start scanning everything. What did they mean by that text? Why did they pause in that sentence? Did I say too much? Should I have said more? You think you're processing, but you're performing, trying to find the perfect response, the safest answer, the version of yourself that can't be criticized or misunderstood or hurt. And the more your mind spins, the more disconnected you become, not just from others, but from yourself. Because underneath all that thinking is often something much simpler, a feeling, something soft, something uncertain, something human, fear, loneliness, shame, longing. And you can't think your way out of those, but your brain tries. Because maybe once overthinking helped you. Maybe you grew up in a place where you had to anticipate people's moods, where silence was dangerous, where you had to figure everything out before it happened. Maybe staying in your head kept you safe when your body didn't feel like a safe place to be. So now, even when you're okay, your brain keeps running simulations, keeps trying to predict the pain before it arrives. But it never really arrives, does it? Just the tension, just the noise, just the sense that something's wrong, even when nothing is. So what do? We stop trying to outthink the spiral, and we start building a relationship with silence. We remind ourselves, this doesn't need another layer of analysis. This doesn't need to be solved tonight. I've thought this thought already, and I survived it. We return to the body, the breath, the moment, not to escape the thought, but to stop feeding it. Overthinking only continues when it's being fed by fear, fed by the illusion of control, fed by the old belief that discomfort is dangerous and certainty is safety. But here's the truth. You are allowed to not know. You are allowed to let it go unresolved. You are allowed to breathe instead of answer. And you're allowed to rest even if the loop hasn't been closed. Let's keep going. But what happens when a looped thought becomes more than just a habit? What happens when a belief forms and starts shaping how you see everything? Let's explore how beliefs become filters. What if the world isn't what it is, but what you believe it to be? What if your mind doesn't just receive reality, but edits it first? You open your eyes each day and assume you're seeing the world, but what if you're not? What if you're seeing a version of it, colored by what you already believe? Because beliefs aren't passive. They're not just ideas sitting on a shelf. They're filters. And once a belief is formed, your mind doesn't just remember it. It starts to look for it. It starts scanning your experiences, conversations, silences, for evidence that the belief is true. That's how cognitive distortion takes root. Not in one moment of false thinking, but in the slow, repeated decision to trust the filter more than the facts. Let's say you carry the belief, I'm not interesting. You walk into a room. Someone doesn't make eye contact. Someone else seems distracted. One person smiles politely but says little. Your brain? It highlights those things, zooms in on them, turns them into proof. You don't notice the warmth in the corner, the glance that lingered, the message waiting for you later. Why? Because it doesn't match the filter. This is the quiet danger of beliefs. They curate reality until only the familiar remains, and the familiar, even when painful, feels safe. Your mind wants to be right more than it wants to be free, and so it will choose the belief that fits the old narrative over the truth that challenges it. That's not self-sabotage. That's adaptation. Most of your deepest beliefs were formed when you were too young to question them. They weren't born in logic. They were born in survival. You believed you weren't enough because someone made you feel invisible. You believed you were too much because someone couldn't handle your brightness. You believed you were unworthy because love came with conditions. And once those beliefs settled in, your brain did what it always does. It made them familiar. It made them automatic. It turned them into filters that color everything you see. The email without an emoji? They're mad. The compliment? They didn't mean it. The silence in the room? You're doing something wrong, not because that's what's happening, but because that's what your belief expects. So what do? We don't rip the filter off. We don't force ourselves to think positive. We start by noticing, gently, curiously, without trying to fix. We ask, what belief is this moment confirming? Who taught me to expect this reaction? What might I see if I loosened the filter just a little? Because beliefs lose their power the moment they're seen. And once you see the filter, you can begin to see beyond it. You may still hear the old voice. I'm too much. I'm not enough. But now there's another voice beside it. The one that wonders, what if I was never the problem? And that voice is the beginning of freedom. But sometimes the filter isn't built from belief alone. Sometimes it's built from emotion. Because what happens when you know better, but still feel worse? Let's explore. When emotion overrides logic, why do we sometimes know better, but still feel worse? Why is it that even when logic tells us one thing, emotion tells us another? And what happens when feeling overrules fact? You've had the thought before. I know they care about me, but I still feel alone. I know it's not a big deal, but I can't stop thinking about it. I know I did my best, but it still feels like failure. This is the split between what you know and what you feel. And in that space, logic doesn't disappear. It just gets drowned out. This is what happens when emotion overrides logic. Not because you're irrational, not because you're broken, but because emotions speak first, faster than thoughts, louder than reason, older than language. Because your emotional brain, the limbic system, was here long before your rational mind evolved. Its job isn't to be accurate, it's to protect, to scan for threat, to react quickly, to prepare for danger, real or imagined. And danger, to the emotional brain, doesn't always look like a tiger. Sometimes it looks like a pause in a sentence, a quiet tone, a text left unanswered, a look that feels just a little too familiar. Your body picks up the signal before your mind can translate it, and it whispers or shouts, "You're not safe. This feels like last time. Brace yourself." By the time logic arrives, emotion already has the wheel. This is why you can know you're safe, but still feel on edge. Why you can know someone loves you, but still wait for them to leave. Why you can know the mistake wasn't that bad, but still carry shame like a sentence. Because emotion doesn't wait for evidence. It doesn't pause to confirm. It responds to possibility, to tone, to silence, to energy, to memory, to anything that resembles past pain. And once it reacts, your thoughts follow its lead. This is emotional reasoning, one of the most powerful cognitive distortions, where feelings become facts. I feel anxious, so something must be wrong. I feel guilty, so I must have done something bad. I feel left out, so they must not like me. Your brain, trying to help, fills in the story to match the emotion. But here's the truth. Emotions aren't lies, but they're not laws either. They are messengers. They are waves. They are echoes of old pain and signals of present need. They are real, but they are not always right. So what do? We don't argue with the emotion. We don't try to logic it away. We slow down. We name it. This is shame. This is fear. This is grief. Not to get rid of it, but to remind ourselves this is a visitor, not a verdict. Then we ask, what is this feeling trying to protect? What part of me is being reminded of something old? Can I hold space for this without obeying it? When logic and emotion are at war, neither one has to win. There is a third voice, your wiser self, the one who can feel deeply and still pause, still ask, still choose. That's not weakness, that's capacity, that's integration, that's healing. But what happens when, for the first time, you catch the distortion as it's forming? When you realize, mid-thought, that something doesn't feel quite true, that's the beginning, and the beginning is powerful. Let's explore. The first step to noticing distortions. What if the real breakthrough isn't when the thought disappears, but when you finally notice it's not the truth? What if healing doesn't begin with fixing, but with seeing? There's a moment, quiet, fleeting, easy to miss, when you hear the thought and something inside you pauses, not to agree, not to resist, just to notice. It sounds like this. Wait, I've heard this before. This voice feels familiar. This thought feels heavier than the moment deserves. That pause? That's the beginning. That's awareness, rising softly, without fanfare. It's the first step to unlearning distortion. Because most distorted thoughts don't sound distorted. They sound like self-protection, like common sense, like just being realistic. They come dressed in the language of certainty. This always happens to me. No one really cares. If I don't do it perfectly, I've failed. And for most of your life, you might have believed them. Why wouldn't you? They were fast. They were automatic. They aligned with old stories that once helped you make sense of hurt. But something's changing now. You're learning to listen without obeying. You're learning that just because a thought shows up doesn't mean you have to follow it home. You're learning to ask, where did this come from? Whose voice does this sound like? Is this thought helping me or hurting me? And most importantly, what happens if I don't believe it? This is the first step. Not replacing the thought, not challenging it, not trying to flip it into something positive, just seeing it, just naming it. Like pointing a flashlight into a dark hallway and saying, "Ah, there you are." When you name the distortion, you stop merging with it. You stop reacting as if it's reality and start creating space between the thought and your identity. You realize, this is catastrophizing. This is emotional reasoning. This is black and white thinking. You realize the thought is just that, a thought, not a prophecy, not a command, not the truth of who you are. And when that space opens, even just a crack, new possibilities enter. You can still feel afraid, but act with clarity. You can still feel doubt, but choose compassion. You can still feel shame, but return to yourself. Gently. This is how change begins. Not with perfect awareness, but with honest noticing. So don't rush this part. Don't skip over the simple act of naming. It's more powerful than it seems. Because when you name a distortion, you remind yourself, I am not this voice. I am the one who hears it. But what happens when a single bad moment starts to color your entire reality? When your mind zooms in on the negative and filters out everything else? Let's explore mental filtering. What happens when one bad moment rewrites the entire story? What do we lose when we only see what hurts and everything else disappears into the blur? Imagine a camera lens. It doesn't show you the whole picture. It chooses what to focus on and blurs out the rest. Your mind does the same. You walk through a day, 10 things happen. 9 are fine. 1 is uncomfortable. Guess which one your mind holds on to? The offhand comment, the strange look, the moment of awkwardness you can't stop replaying, even if the rest of the day was quiet, kind, safe. That one moment hijacks the story. This is mental filtering. It's the habit of focusing on the negative and ignoring the neutral, the positive, the gentle, in between. And the worst part, you don't realize you're doing it because it feels true. Your thoughts say, that smile didn't mean anything. That compliment wasn't sincere. Sure, the meeting went well, but I stumbled on that one sentence. And just like that, your whole experience becomes distorted. Your memory of the day shifts, your mood follows, and the filter deepens. Filtering doesn't start with a conscious choice. It starts with a belief that says, good things don't last. I don't deserve praise. Something's always about to go wrong. That belief becomes the lens, and once the lens is in place, you only see what proves it right. But here's what filtering doesn't tell you. It's not showing you the full picture. It's not neutral. It's selective. And it doesn't mean you're lying to yourself. It means your mind has been conditioned to prioritize threat over truth. That's what brains evolved to do. We remember the danger. We rehearse the mistake. We obsess over the one piece that feels off because we think it'll protect us next time. But what it really does is steal your peace this time. So what do? We don't force ourselves to look on the bright side. We don't argue with the thought. We widen the frame. We ask, what else happened today? Is this the whole story or just the loudest part? What am I overlooking because of this one uncomfortable detail? You're not invalidating the pain. You're expanding the view. You're reminding yourself that one shadow doesn't mean there was no light. That one awkward moment doesn't erase the gentle ones. That one self-critical spiral doesn't mean you've gone backward. This is not about pretending everything is okay. It's about remembering that everything includes more than just what hurts. It's about learning to say, yes, that happened. And so did this. And both are true. Because real clarity doesn't come from erasing the negative. It comes from restoring the balance. But what happens when you stop filtering moments and start filtering people? When you assume you already know what they're thinking, even when they haven't said a word? Let's explore mind reading. Why do we assume we know what others are thinking, even when they've said nothing at all? Why does silence feel louder than words ever could? And why is the story in our head so much harsher than the one they never told? It happens before you even notice. You walk into a room, catch a glance, a shift in tone, a delayed response, and suddenly your mind fills in the blanks. They're annoyed. They're disappointed. They think I'm too much. You weren't told this. No one said a word. But your brain doesn't wait for confirmation. It predicts. It takes what's ambiguous, a pause, a posture, a sigh, and turns it into a story. That story is often a familiar one you've heard before, one you've lived before. This is mind reading, one of the most common cognitive distortions. It's the assumption that you know what someone else is thinking, and that what they're thinking is about you. You don't need evidence. You just know. And the knowing feels heavy. It feels real. Because it's not just coming from this moment. It's coming from many before it. Mind reading isn't about arrogance. It's about protection. If you can guess what they're thinking, you can prepare for it. If you can predict their rejection, you can soften the blow. If you can anticipate the shame, you don't have to feel surprised by it. It's self-defense, built on past pain. Because maybe once you were surprised by cruelty, by judgment, by the withdrawal of love without warning. So now, your mind assumes the worst, so it doesn't have to feel caught off guard again. But here's the problem. You're not responding to them. You're responding to a version of them you created in your head. And the real person, they get lost in the noise. You pull away before they've even spoken. You shrink yourself in conversations they never started. You reject yourself before anyone else has the chance to. This is the harm of mind reading. It doesn't just shape how you see others. It shapes how you treat yourself. So what do? We start small. The next time your brain whispers, "They think I'm annoying. They're tired of me." They didn't respond because they're done. Pause. Ask, did they actually say that? What else could this mean? Am I reacting to this moment or a memory? You can even name the distortion out loud. This is mind reading. Not to dismiss your feeling, but to anchor it in awareness. Because there's a difference between a feeling and a fact. There's a difference between someone being distant and your fear saying why. You don't need to stop the thought. You just need to see that it's a thought, not truth. And maybe, if it feels safe, you ask instead of assume. You speak instead of spiraling. You say, "Hey, I noticed a shift. Are we okay? I'm feeling a little unsure. Can I check in with you?" And if that feels too hard, that's okay too. Even just recognizing when the mind is reading instead of receiving is a powerful step toward clarity, because the goal isn't perfect trust, it's awareness. And with awareness, you can begin to relate to people instead of your fears about them. But what happens when you don't just assume what others think? You start assuming the worst-case scenario about everything? Let's explore catastrophizing. Why does your mind jump to the worst-case scenario before anything's even happened? Why does one small problem suddenly become a story of collapse, failure, or loss? And why does fear feel more convincing than calm ever could? It starts with something small, a strange text, a delayed reply, a tight feeling in your chest. Nothing catastrophic, not yet. But your mind doesn't wait for proof. It fills in the story. They're mad at me. Something must be wrong. This is all going to fall apart. That's catastrophizing, when your thoughts leap from a small discomfort to the worst possible outcome. And they leap fast. Before you've even caught your breath, your brain's already spun a full narrative. You'll lose the job. They'll walk away. You'll say the wrong thing. Everything will fall apart, and you'll be alone. It's not because you're dramatic. It's because your mind is scanning for risk. Catastrophizing is the brain's attempt to stay ahead of danger, to anticipate pain before it lands, to prepare you, even if the pain never comes, because pain is easier to manage when you expect it, or at least, that's what the brain believes. But here's the problem. Living in constant anticipation of disaster doesn't prevent pain. It creates it. You begin to feel the consequences of things that haven't even happened. You rehearse grief. You practice rejection. You emotionally collapse over something imaginary, and your body doesn't know the difference, because the nervous system reacts to thought the same way it reacts to reality. So your chest tightens, your breath shortens, your shoulders rise, your heart pounds, and suddenly you feel like something is wrong, because your body is in survival mode. This creates a loop. You feel anxious, so your mind looks for reasons. It finds one, or makes one. Your body reacts, and now that reaction becomes more proof, and the spiral continues. But here's the truth. Catastrophizing isn't logic. It's fear, rehearsed. It's your past pain trying to protect your present self from repeating the same story. And it's exhausting. So what do? We meet the spiral with presence, with interruption, with gentleness. When the thought says, "What if this goes horribly wrong?" Ask, "What else is possible? Is this thought helping me prepare, or just making me panic? What would I say to a friend who was thinking this?" You don't need to believe the best-case scenario. You just need to stop worshiping the worst one. You can acknowledge risk without bowing to doom. You can say, "Yes, I'm scared, but I'm not a prophet. Yes, it's possible, but it's not happening yet. Yes, something might go wrong, but I will meet it when, and if, it does." Because catastrophizing doesn't make you safer. It makes you smaller. It convinces you to live in grief before anything's even been lost. And the moment you catch that pattern, the moment you realize the future isn't fact, you reclaim your power. But what happens when the emotion doesn't just distort the future? It becomes the measure of what's true? Let's look at one of the most subtle and convincing distortions of all: emotional reasoning. What if the emotion itself became the evidence? What if feeling afraid meant something must be wrong, and feeling ashamed meant you did something bad? What if the way you feel quietly rewrote what you believe is true? Sometimes the thought doesn't come first. The feeling does. You wake up with unease, or heaviness, or tension in your chest that doesn't have a name. And instead of asking what it is, your mind answers for you. If I feel anxious, there must be danger. If I feel lonely, no one must care. If I feel bad, I must have done something wrong. This is emotional reasoning when you interpret reality based on how you feel, not on evidence, not on clarity, but on emotion. And emotion, as powerful and human as it is not always a mirror. Sometimes it's a lens. Because emotions are responses, not always signals of truth. They rise from old wounds, from unmet needs, from tiny cues in the world around you that remind your nervous system of something it once feared. And when those feelings arrive, they don't knock politely. They take up space. They take the mic. And sometimes they narrate the story before the facts get a chance to speak. Emotional reasoning is subtle because it doesn't feel like a distortion. It feels like knowing. You don't think I feel rejected, so I must be unlovable. You just feel unlovable. You don't think I feel overwhelmed, so I must be failing. You just feel like a failure. Your mind follows the body and your beliefs follow the mind. That's the loop. But here's the quiet truth. You can feel something deeply, and it can still be untrue. You can feel anxious in a safe place. You can feel shame in the presence of love. You can feel fear after making the right choice. Because emotions are not always reacting to now. Sometimes they're reacting to then. A smell, a silence, a look, a phrase. And suddenly you're not in this moment, you're in that one. The one your body still remembers. So what do? We don't argue with the feeling. We make space beside it. We learn to ask, what is this feeling saying? And what else might be true? We say, this feels real, but is it based on what's here or what was? This emotion is valid, but does it mean the belief it brings is true? You're not trying to remove emotion. You're learning to hold it without letting it drive, to feel something without handing it the pen to rewrite your story. Emotions are important, but they are not judges. They are messengers, and the message might not be, this is true. It might be, this is tender. This is old. This needs care. But what happens when the thoughts become personal, so personal that everything somehow becomes your fault? Let's explore one of the most deeply internalized distortions, personalization. Why do you blame yourself for things you didn't cause? Why does everything that goes wrong feel like a reflection of who you are? Why do you carry so much that was never truly yours? There's a moment. Something goes wrong. Plans fall through. Someone pulls away. Tension fills the air. And before you ask what happened, your mind answers, it's my fault. Even if no one said it. Even if you weren't there. Even if deep down you know it doesn't make sense. Still, your body tightens. Still, the guilt rises. Still, the story begins. Maybe I said the wrong thing. Maybe I'm too much. Maybe if I had just done better, this wouldn't have happened. This is personalization, the distortion that convinces you that you are somehow responsible for things beyond your control. It's the reflex to turn every difficulty into a mirror and then punish yourself for the reflection. You don't just experience the pain, you become the cause of it. And that belief is heavy. But it didn't come from nowhere. You might have grown up in an environment where you were blamed for things you didn't understand, where you had to make peace with others' anger just to survive it, where your emotional safety depended on your ability to make others okay. So your brain learned, if something feels off, it must be me. That belief became a shield. If you were the problem, maybe you could also be the solution. It gave you control, but it came at the cost of your self-worth. because the more you take responsibility for what isn't yours, the less space you have to hold compassion for yourself. And the more you personalize, the harder it becomes to see others clearly. You start interpreting every silence as disapproval, every mood as your mistake, every conflict as confirmation that you've failed again. It's exhausting, and it's not the truth. So what do? We begin to separate, not from people, but from the guilt that doesn't belong to us. We ask, is this really mine to carry? What part of this is truly within my control? Would I hold someone else to this same impossible standard? We remind ourselves, just because someone is upset doesn't mean it's your fault. Just because something went wrong doesn't mean you are wrong. Just because you feel guilty doesn't mean you are guilty. You can still be kind without collapsing. You can still be accountable without absorbing what isn't yours. You can still care without over-owning every outcome. Personalization is not humility. It's self-erasure. And you deserve to exist outside of someone else's disappointment. But what happens when the pain is quiet? Not sharp, but chronic. When it's not one moment that breaks you, but the accumulation of trying, giving, hoping with nothing to show for it. Let's look closely at a distortion that hides beneath goodness, heaven's reward fallacy. What happens when you do everything right, but still don't feel seen, loved, or chosen? What happens when your goodness goes unnoticed, and your kindness is met with silence? Do you question the world or yourself? You try. You give. You show up. You offer patience when you're tired, forgiveness when you're hurt, gentleness when no one else does. You stay kind, stay humble, stay responsible. Because somewhere deep inside there's a quiet belief, if I do good things will come back to me. It sounds fair. It sounds hopeful. And sometimes it's true. But when it's not, when the effort goes unseen, when the kindness is not returned, when the good life you were promised never quite arrives, the pain doesn't just come from disappointment. It comes from betrayal. You followed the rules. You stayed soft. You kept showing up. So why does it still hurt? Why does it still feel like not enough? This is the heaven's reward fallacy, the belief that life should be fair as long as you are, that your suffering has earned relief, that your loyalty should have protected you from loss, that your good heart should have spared you the ache. But life doesn't always follow that script, because people don't always mirror your goodness, and systems don't always reward your quiet effort. And sometimes, the ones who took less care seem to get more love. And that hurts. It hurts not just because of what happened, but because of what you expected. Because the harder you try to be good, the harder it is to believe that pain can still come. You start thinking, maybe I didn't try hard enough. Maybe I wasn't as good as I thought I was. Maybe this is what I deserve after all. But that's the fallacy talking. Because kindness is not a transaction. It's not a contract. And pain is not always punishment. Your goodness is not a guarantee. It is a gift. And not everyone knows how to receive it. So what do? We grieve what we expected. We feel the betrayal without blaming ourselves for being hopeful. And then we remind ourselves, you didn't do good things to earn love. You did them because love lives in you. You didn't stay kind for the reward. You stayed kind because it's who you are. And no outcome, no silence, no loss can take that from you. Yes, you deserve rest. You deserve recognition. You deserve reciprocation. But you don't have to twist yourself to prove it anymore. Your worth was never supposed to be earned through endless giving. But what happens when the rules in your mind become rigid? When they don't just guide your actions, they judge your worth? Let's explore a distortion that sounds like principle, but often becomes punishment should statements. What happens when every step you take is followed by a whisper that says, "You should have done more"? What happens when your inner compass stops guiding and starts judging? You wake up and it begins. I should get up earlier. I should be more motivated. I should have handled that better. And as the day unfolds, the voice follows you. I shouldn't feel this way. I should be further along. I should be stronger by now. This is the should, not the kind that gently reminds, but the kind that shames. The kind that disguises pressure as principle, that dresses judgment as self-improvement, that turns every choice into a moral test you always seem to fail. These are should statements, a common cognitive distortion that turns your inner world into a courtroom. They sound like rules, but they feel like chains. And the more you listen to them, the more disconnected you become from what's real, what's human. Because the should doesn't ask how you feel. It doesn't care what you need. It only measures you against a standard you didn't choose and can never quite reach. I should be over this by now. I should have known better. I should be more grateful. Where did these rules come from? Sometimes from childhood, sometimes from culture, sometimes from people who believed that guilt was a better teacher than grace, and sometimes you created them yourself as a way to feel in control when everything else felt uncertain. Because should feels safer than confusion. Striving feels safer than stillness. Blame feels safer than vulnerability. But safety built on self-criticism isn't really safety. It's tension. It's shame. It's a constant hum of not enoughness in the background of your life. So what do? We begin to notice. We soften the voice of should and ask it to speak more clearly. When you hear, "I should be more productive," try asking, "Why do I believe that? Whose voice is this really? What do I actually need right now?" Sometimes the should hides a want, "I want to feel accomplished." Sometimes it hides a fear, "I am afraid of being seen as lazy." Sometimes it hides a wound, "I was only ever loved when I was achieving." The goal isn't to eliminate all structure, it's to replace shame with self-awareness. So the next time your mind says, "You should have done more," you might respond, "Maybe. But maybe I did the best I could with what I had today." Let your inner dialogue evolve from command into curiosity. You are not a project to fix. You are a person to meet. And every should is an invitation to come home to yourself with more compassion than before. But what happens when your entire day becomes defined by one flaw, one moment, one mistake? When the lens you see through isn't just tinted, it's completely distorted. Let's explore a distortion that blurs everything else labeling. What happens when a single moment defines your whole identity? When a mistake stops being something you did and becomes who you are? When the voice inside doesn't just criticize, it names you, and that name becomes your truth. There's a thought that doesn't leave room for nuance. It doesn't explain. It doesn't explore. It doesn't wonder. It declares, "I'm such an idiot. I'm a failure. I'm just too much. I'm not good enough." That's labeling. When your mind takes one moment, one flaw, one feeling, and turns it into a name. Not a temporary thought, a fixed identity. You're no longer someone who made a mistake. You are the mistake. You're no longer someone who's hurting. You are too sensitive. You're no longer someone who feels anxious. You are weak. And the moment you accept that label, you stop looking for context. You stop asking questions. You stop wondering what else could be true. Because the label feels final, heavy, branded into your sense of self. But here's what we often forget. Labels simplify, but they also shrink. They strip away complexity. They erase the full story. They take a living, breathing, growing person and flatten them into one word. Where do these labels come from? Sometimes they're inherited, spoken over you when you were too young to resist them. You're lazy, you're difficult, you're dramatic. Sometimes they're self-inflicted, formed in the moments of shame when you didn't know how else to explain the pain. You thought, if I call myself the problem, maybe I can fix it. And maybe that worked for a while. Maybe it gave you a sense of control. But over time, labels don't just describe you, they confine you. They shape what you notice, what you expect, what you allow yourself to become. Because once your mind believes the label, it starts filtering your reality through it. Of course they don't like me. I'm annoying. Of course I failed. I'm not smart enough. Of course I'm alone. I'm unlovable. The label becomes a lens, and eventually you stop seeing yourself through your own eyes, and only through the story it told. But here's the truth. You are not one word. You are not one moment. You are not one version of yourself frozen in time. You are allowed to change, to grow, to outgrow. So what do? We notice the label. We name the moment. We say, this is labeling. This is me turning a thought into an identity. This is a reflex, not reality. And then we begin to soften it. Try shifting. I'm a failure. I feel disappointed. I'm broken. I'm hurting. I'm too much. I have big feelings. Notice what happens when you replace the label with something more human, more honest, more alive. Because healing doesn't come from slapping on a positive label instead. It comes from letting yourself be more than just one thing. You can be anxious and brave, messy and kind, uncertain and still worthy of love. But what happens when the thoughts aren't just harsh? They're extreme. When the language in your mind becomes all or nothing, always or never, with no room in between. Let's look closer at a distortion that erases the gray, all or nothing thinking. Why does it feel like if you're not perfect, you failed? Why is it so hard to live in the middle, to be enough, even when you're not everything? And why does your mind keep turning the world into black and white when life was always shades of gray? It starts with a subtle feeling. A plan doesn't go how you wanted. You make a mistake. You miss a step. You're tired. You say the wrong thing. And suddenly the voice arrives. I ruined everything. I never get this right. Of course. I always do this. This is all or nothing thinking, also known as black and white thinking. It's the distortion that convinces you that unless it's perfect, it's worthless. That unless you're at your best, you're failing. That one step back means the journey's over. It's harsh, it's rigid, it's exhausting, but it's also familiar. Because maybe somewhere along the way you were taught that your worth was tied to achievement, that success was praise, and anything less was disappointment. Maybe you lived in a world where there wasn't room for nuance, where mistakes had high costs, where being wrong didn't just mean correction, it meant disconnection. And so, your brain adapted. It learned to see extremes, to avoid middle ground, to reduce the world to two categories, win or lose, strong or weak, lovable or unlovable. But the truth? Life doesn't work that way. Healing isn't linear. Progress is rarely clean. And being human means being somewhere in between. Always. You can make a mistake and still be growing. You can struggle today and still be worthy of love. You can fall short and still be enough. But all or nothing thinking doesn't leave room for that truth. It says, if you didn't respond to that message, you're a terrible friend. If you didn't meet every goal today, you're lazy. If you feel sad again, you're back at square one. But you're not back at square one. You're on a path. You're in motion. And growth isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. So what do? We begin to reintroduce the middle, not to erase the extremes, but to hold both. We ask, is it possible I did some things right today? Could it be that I'm doing my best, even if it doesn't look perfect? What else might be true besides complete failure or total success? You don't need to jump from never to always. Just shift from never to not yet, from failure to learning, from worthless to wounded. The middle is messy, but it's where the truth lives. It's where softness exists, where change happens, where you remember you're not here to be perfect. You're here to be whole. But what happens when the mind not only sees things in extremes, but also starts drawing conclusions with no proof at all? Let's explore a distortion that skips the evidence and lands on the assumption, jumping to conclusions. What happens when your mind answers questions that were never asked? When it fills in the silence, writes the ending, and calls it fact before anything's even happened? What if the story you're living was never fully true to begin with? You send a message, no reply. Minutes pass, then hours, and before the day ends, you're already halfway through the story in your mind. They're upset. I must have said something wrong. They're pulling away. It's happening again. No confirmation, no evidence, just a feeling, and a fast conclusion. This is jumping to conclusions, when your mind skips the process of wondering and lands directly in the place of certainty. It's not about logic. It's about anticipation, protection, prediction. Because maybe you learned that it was safer to assume the worst than to wait in the unknown. So your thoughts try to prepare you. They rush ahead, they search for patterns. They tell you, if I figure out the ending now, maybe it won't hurt as much later. But here's the cost. You live in the pain before it arrives, and sometimes it never does. You rehearse rejection before it's spoken. You mourn connection that hasn't even ended. You withdraw before anyone asks you to go. All based on what? A look, a pause, a tone, a silence. Your brain turns these into answers, and those answers turn into beliefs. Not because you're wrong, but because you're afraid. Afraid of being blindsided. Afraid of being the last to know. Afraid of hoping and being let down again. So you decide, it's better to expect the worst. But it's not. Because the worst, even if it never comes, becomes the place you live. So what do? We begin with a breath. We notice the urge to finish the sentence before it's been spoken. We ask, do I actually know this is true? Is this a feeling or a fact? Have I been here before and was I right? And then we try, gently, to return to what we do know. They haven't responded. That's it. That's what we know. The rest is a story. And even if the story feels real, it hasn't happened yet. You can pause it. You can hold space for the unknown without needing to name it something scary. You can wait without collapsing. Because maybe, this time, you don't need to pre-live the pain just to prove you're strong. Maybe you're strong enough now to let things unfold without writing the ending first. But what happens when the mind doesn't just assume a future? It pretends to know what other people see, feel, or believe. When it speaks on their behalf, with a voice that sounds a lot like judgment. Let's look deeper at the distortion of projection. Why does it sometimes feel like the world is judging you, even when no one has said a word? Why do their eyes feel sharp when their faces are soft? Why do you hear disappointment in their silence when it's really coming from inside you? You're in a room. You glance around. Someone looks away. Someone else stays quiet. And your thoughts begin to whisper, they're bored of me. They're annoyed. They're judging the way I speak, the way I move, the way I am. No one told you this. No one said a thing. But you feel it, deep in the gut, heavy in the chest. It feels true. This is projection. When your inner voice puts on someone else's face. When what you feel about yourself gets assigned to the world around you. It doesn't always come with awareness. It doesn't always feel like distortion. It feels like survival. Because somewhere along the way, your nervous system learned to see threat in anticipation. If I expect the rejection, maybe it'll hurt less. If I predict the judgment, maybe I'll have time to fix myself first. If I see it coming, maybe I won't be caught off guard again. But the cost of projecting your fears onto others is that you never get to meet them. Only your own reflection in their place. You're not hearing them. You're hearing your own shame echoing through their silence. You're not seeing their expression. You're seeing your self-criticism wearing their face. You're not responding to them. You're responding to a ghost. And that ghost is usually younger, usually wounded, usually afraid. Projection often isn't loud. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just that moment when you interpret someone's tiredness as proof that you're too much. When you hear their distraction and translate it as disapproval. When you assume their stillness is a signal to shrink. But what's really happening is that your mind is filling in the silence with the same stories it's always known. So what do? We return, gently, inward. We ask, what feeling am I trying not to feel right now? Whose voice am I hearing? Really? Is this about this moment? Or is this about something much older? Projection isn't a failure of awareness. It's a signal that there's something inside you asking to be heard, something that once felt too painful to carry alone, so it got cast out onto someone else's face. You're not wrong for doing this. You were trying to survive something, but now you're safe enough to see it, to stay, to unblend. Not everything you think others believe is what they believe. Not every reaction is about you. Not every silence is rejection. Sometimes silence is just silence, and you are worthy of being seen by eyes that aren't shaped by your fear. But what happens when you finally do feel seen, but struggle to believe it? What happens when someone offers care, and your first instinct is to explain it away? Let's explore one of the quietest, most convincing distortions, discounting the positive. Why is it so hard to let goodness in? Why do you question compliments, shrink from praise, and explain away your own light? Why does kindness feel suspicious, while criticism feels deserved? Someone says something kind. You're really thoughtful. You handled that so well. You're good at what you do. And almost instantly, your mind responds, they're just being polite. They don't really mean that. If they knew the real me, they'd feel differently. That's discounting the positive, the distortion that filters out anything good that might challenge your pain. The achievement? It was luck. The compliment? They were just being nice. The progress you made? It doesn't count. Not really. And slowly, no matter how much love or evidence or encouragement you receive, it all slips through your fingers before it ever reaches your heart. It's like your mind has built a wall with one-way glass. You can see the light, but you won't let it in. Because maybe letting it in would mean changing the story. And that story, the one that says you're not enough, that you're falling behind, that you're a burden, has become familiar. Not because it's true, but because it's safe. There's a strange safety in expecting less, in rejecting the good before it has a chance to leave, in guarding against hope so you don't feel the loss of it later. But the cost is this: you never get to feel the goodness that's real. You never get to own the progress you've made. You never get to believe the love that's offered. You keep yourself outside your own healing. So what do? We start small, with the moment right in front of you. The next time someone says something kind, pause before deflecting, before explaining it away. before responding with a joke or an apology. Let it land. Let it linger. You don't have to believe it completely. Just let it sit. Try saying, "Thank you," even if it feels awkward, even if part of you still resists. And when your mind says, "They're just being nice," you can gently answer, "And maybe it's still true." You're not forcing positivity. You're just opening the door a little. You're reminding yourself that not everything beautiful has to be a trick, that not every kindness needs to be explained away, that you are not only the pain you've survived, you are the grace that's learning how to receive. But what happens when you do allow good things in and suddenly feel like you have to earn them? What happens when rest feels irresponsible and happiness feels dangerous? Let's explore the distortion that tells you, if I suffer enough, I'll finally be okay. Welcome to the Fallacy of Heaven's Reward. What happens when love turns into a project? When care becomes control and closeness becomes a silent campaign to turn someone into who you wish they'd be? What happens when your peace depends on someone else becoming different? At first, it feels like love. You notice something about them, a habit, a mood, a way of shutting down or acting out, and you think, they don't mean to do that. They just need someone who sees the good in them. With enough time, enough patience, enough love, they'll change. So you stay. You soothe. You explain. You shrink around their edges. You build reasons around their silence. You call their distance a wound, and you offer yourself as medicine. This is the fallacy of change, the belief that if you care enough, try hard enough, love deeply enough, someone else will become who you need them to be. And when they don't, you don't blame them. You blame yourself. Maybe I wasn't gentle enough. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I just needed to be more patient. But here's what this distortion forgets. People change when they choose, not when you suffer enough to earn it. The fallacy of change is quiet. It hides beneath loyalty. It wears the mask of potential. It calls itself devotion. But underneath, it's a silent bargain. If I love you well enough, you'll become safe. And it rarely works. Because when your love comes with conditions, even if they're unspoken, be better, heal faster, stop hurting me like this. It turns connection into performance. It makes your nervous system a scoreboard. You monitor their growth, their behavior, their reactions. And the more you try to help them become someone else, the more disconnected you become from yourself. But this doesn't make you manipulative. It makes you human. We want people to grow. We want the ones we love to become the best version of themselves. But the distortion lies in the if. If they change, I'll feel okay. Because that belief keeps your peace on someone else's timeline. It ties your safety to someone else's readiness. It convinces you to delay your own healing while waiting for theirs to begin. So what do? We begin to untangle the threads. We ask, do I love them, or the version of them I hope they'll become? Am I staying because they're growing, or because I'm afraid to walk away? If nothing changed, could I still feel safe here? And if the answer is no, that doesn't make you selfish. It makes you honest. Because you deserve relationships that are rooted in reality, not in the hope of a future someone never agreed to build. You deserve to be chosen, not for how well you adapt, but for how freely you exist. You are not responsible for someone else's evolution. You can support, you can encourage, you can love, but you cannot build someone's healing with bricks made from your own boundaries. But what happens when the labels we use don't stay contained to one person? When we take a single trait, a single mistake, and apply it to everything. Let's explore a distortion that inflates one detail into the whole picture: global labeling. Why do we take one trait, one moment, one mistake, and let it define the whole person? Why do we turn small flaws into total identities, especially our own? What happens when the part becomes the whole, and we stop seeing clearly at all? You forget something. You make a mistake. You miss a deadline. You react in a way you wish you hadn't. And suddenly it's not just a mistake, it's a name. I'm such a mess. I'm a terrible friend. I'm a failure. Not, I forgot, but I'm unreliable. Not, I was quiet today, but I'm awkward. I'm boring. I don't belong. This is global labeling, a distortion that turns the personal into the permanent, that takes one part of you and uses it to define all of you. It's fast, it's automatic, and it's deeply convincing, because your brain is always trying to simplify. One label is easier than uncertainty. One sweeping conclusion is quicker than sorting through nuance. And so it labels, not just people, but situations, not just behavior, but identity. They're a narcissist. She's toxic. He's always like this. But the problem with global labeling isn't just that it's inaccurate, it's that it's limiting. Once we assign a label, we stop asking questions. We stop being curious. We stop seeing clearly. We miss the moment. We miss the growth. We miss the possibility that people, including ourselves, might be more than the worst thing we've seen. Because here's the truth. You can be forgetful and still be dependable. You can be quiet and still be interesting. You can struggle and still be strong. Global labeling takes away the space to hold contradictions. But being human is contradiction. You are allowed to be both soft and fierce, both healing and uncertain, both flawed and worthy. So what do? We start by noticing the label. We say, I'm using a global judgment here. I've reduced the complexity into a single word. And then we challenge it with kindness. We ask, what's the evidence for this label? Is this true all the time? Or just in this moment? What would I say to a friend who spoke to themselves this way? We start separating the moment from the identity. You made a mistake. You're not a mistake. You felt awkward. You are not awkwardness itself. You struggled today. That doesn't mean you're failing at life. And others too. They're not their worst traits. They're not the sum of your pain. They're not only the version you knew once. This doesn't mean we excuse harm. It means we resist shrinking people down to the easiest possible narrative. Because every time we flatten someone with a label, we lose the chance to meet who they actually are. And when we do it to ourselves, we forget who we are becoming. But what happens when the labels don't just come from judgment? They come from fear. When you see the world through the lens of what could go wrong, because danger once lived too close. Let's explore the next distortion. Filtering by fear. What if fear wasn't just a feeling, but a filter? What if every look, every silence, every choice was colored by something that hasn't even happened yet? What if your mind, in trying to protect you, was quietly turning every light into a shadow? It's not always loud. Sometimes fear whispers, a shift in someone's tone, a change in plans, an unexpected moment of quiet, and instantly your body tenses. Your mind begins to scan. Something's wrong. They're pulling away. This always happens. Even if there's no real danger, even if everything is okay, still, fear sharpens your senses, but distorts your perception. This is filtering by fear, a cognitive distortion that causes you to see the world through the lens of what you're afraid will happen. It doesn't mean you're irrational. It means your nervous system is carrying a story it hasn't had the chance to finish. Because fear rarely arises from now. It rises from then, from the moment you were caught off guard, from the time no one warned you, from the experience that hurt when you didn't see it coming. So now your mind stays alert, not because something is wrong, but because something once was. Fear becomes a filter, and through that filter everything changes. A delay becomes distance, a question becomes interrogation, a quiet moment becomes a threat. And your mind doesn't just notice, it assumes. You expect betrayal, you prepare for abandonment, you interpret every neutral moment as the beginning of the fall. But this comes from pain, not from truth. Because filtering by fear isn't about facts, it's about protection. It says, if I can spot the danger early, I won't feel helpless again. But fear isn't good at subtlety. It doesn't whisper, be mindful. It screams, run. And when that voice takes over, it hijacks your reality. You stop seeing clearly. You start reacting to shadows. You miss what's safe because you're watching for what might hurt. So what do? We don't silence the fear. We acknowledge it. We say, this is a fear response. This is not a prediction. It's a memory. We ask, what am I afraid of right now? What past pain is being projected onto this moment? What else might be true if fear wasn't in charge? And then we breathe. We remind our bodies that this moment is new, that the threat is not the same, that this person is not the past, that this silence is not a goodbye. We learn to notice the filter without living inside it, because fear wants to keep you safe, but it often forgets that you're stronger now. And when you stop filtering everything through fear, you begin to notice what was always there: warmth, curiosity, safety, care, love. But what happens when the mind stops asking questions altogether and starts needing certainty just to feel calm? When it confuses knowing with safety? Let's explore one of the most paralyzing distortions, the illusion of certainty. Why do we chase answers that don't exist? Why do we treat uncertainty like a threat and doubt like failure? What happens when peace becomes dependent on being sure? You feel a shift, a change in energy, something subtle, something small, and almost immediately the search begins. What does this mean? Why did they say it like that? Did I do something wrong? You run through conversations, rehearse your tone, scan for signs, fill in the blanks with fear disguised as fact, because the unknown feels dangerous. This is the illusion of certainty, a cognitive distortion that tells you you have to know in order to feel safe. It whispers, if I could just be sure, I'd finally feel okay. And so you search, you overthink, you overanalyze, you replay every word, you read too deeply into pauses, delays, timing, silences, not because you want control, but because uncertainty feels unbearable. But here's the trap. The more certainty you chase, the more unstable you feel, because life doesn't offer it. People don't guarantee it. And your mind, in trying to protect you, keeps spinning in a loop that never resolves. You check, you ask, you replay, you soothe, briefly, and then it returns. Because certainty wasn't what you needed. What you needed was to feel safe in uncertainty. But that's the hardest thing to learn, especially if you grew up in a world where the unknown meant danger, where moods changed fast, where silence meant something was wrong, where being alert was how you survived. So now, your brain fills in the gaps before reality has a chance to. But in doing so, you often create the very anxiety you're trying to avoid, because chasing certainty in an uncertain world will always leave you anxious, exhausted, and disconnected from the moment you're in. So what do? We start by noticing the need. We name it. This is the urge to be certain. This is my nervous system trying to protect me. Then we ask, can I allow this moment to be unresolved? Can I stay curious without jumping to a conclusion? Can I sit with the discomfort without trying to fix it right now? Because certainty isn't peace, presence is. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to predict what happens next. You don't need to earn safety by solving a puzzle that was never yours to hold. You're allowed to not know. You're allowed to wait and see. You're allowed to let silence be silence and not a threat. That's not passivity. That's power. To meet the unknown without armoring up. To say, I don't know yet, and I can still be okay here. But what happens when the distortion doesn't just live in your thoughts, but starts shaping the very world you move through? What happens when distorted thinking hides in plain sight? On your phone. Let's explore how modern life quietly reinforces our mental traps, social media, and distorted thinking. What happens when a scroll becomes a spiral? When curated images turn into distorted truths? What happens when comparison hides in the palm of your hand and your thoughts stop sounding like your own? You open your phone, just for a minute, just to check in, and suddenly, you're not just scrolling, you're comparing, you're questioning, you're shrinking. Someone shares a win, someone posts a photo, smiling, glowing, surrounded. Someone announces something beautiful, something hard-earned, something you didn't know you were missing until you saw it there, in their filtered frame, and your mind begins to speak. I'm behind. I don't look like that. Why does it come so easily for them? The distortions don't shout. They whisper. They drift in through repetition. Mental filtering, only seeing their highlight reel. Should statements, I should be doing more. Labeling, I'm just not like them. Catastrophizing, I'll never get where they are. Emotional reasoning, I feel unworthy, so I must be. All or nothing thinking, they have it all together. I'm a mess. Social media doesn't create these distortions, but it amplifies them. It gives them mirrors. It gives them momentum, because the feed never ends, and neither does the feeling that you're not enough. But here's the truth. You are comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's carefully chosen moment. You are looking at pixels, but interpreting them as proof. You are measuring your worth against a fantasy you were never meant to compete with. And the more you scroll, the more your brain starts filtering reality through an algorithm's lens. You forget that most people don't share their silence, their regret, their stretch marks, sleepless nights, lost dreams, or quiet breakdowns in the dark. You forget that someone can post something joyful and still feel hollow, that someone can seem ahead but feel completely lost, that you are seeing the surface, not the story. So what do? We step back, not in shame, not in anger, but in awareness. We ask, how do I feel when I scroll? Whose voice enters my mind afterward? Is this fueling connection or comparison? Then we recenter. We remind ourselves, you are not behind. You are not broken. You are not required to keep up with someone else's curated timeline. You are not a brand. You are not a product. You don't need an audience to prove you're becoming something beautiful. You are allowed to log off without guilt, to post less, to protect your peace, to return to your life as it is, unfiltered, unfinished, and enough. But what happens when these distortions don't stay online? When they seep into your closest relationships? When love, friendship, and connection begin to feel like a minefield of invisible rules? Let's explore relationships through the lens of distortion. Why does love sometimes feel like walking on glass? Why does a simple silence feel like abandonment? Why does care get mistaken for control, or distance mistaken for rejection? What happens when cognitive distortions begin to shape the way we see each other? You're in conversation. Something shifts. Their tone changes. Their eyes look away. The energy feels off. And before you ask, your mind answers. They're annoyed with me. I must have said something wrong. I knew it. I'm too much again. This is how quickly distorted thinking enters relationships. It doesn't knock. It slips in, quiet and familiar, wrapped in old stories and ancient fears. Because we don't just relate to people. We relate through the filter of everything we've lived before. Every unmet need, every broken trust, every learned belief about what love is, what safety costs, and what it means to belong. And when cognitive distortions take hold, those beliefs start writing the dialogue before a single word is spoken. You assume what they think. Mind reading. You expect the worst. Fortune telling. You react as if it's already gone wrong. Emotional reasoning. You over-apologize. Personalization. You walk away before they can. All or nothing thinking. And what started as connection becomes a cycle of protection. You brace, you predict, you perform, you shrink, and sometimes you leave. Not because they hurt you, but because your mind convinced you that they would. But here's what we often forget. Cognitive distortions don't just impact how we see ourselves. They shape how we interpret each other. They take a loving, "Are you okay?" and translate it into criticism. They take a pause and turn it into punishment. They take a boundary and call it abandonment. But that's not truth. That's a signal that there's something in you asking for safety. So what do? We pause the reaction. We name the reflex. We ask, is this a pattern from now or a fear from before? Is this person actually pulling away, or am I preparing for loss? What's the story I'm telling myself right now? Then, we choose to stay open, not unguarded, not naive, but present. We practice communicating the question. Instead of reacting to the assumption, we say, "Can I check something with you? I notice myself pulling back. I think I'm afraid. Here's what my brain is telling me. Can we talk about it?" Because when you name the distortion, you shrink its power, and in its place, something else can grow. Understanding, clarity, repair, connection. You don't need perfect thoughts to love well. You just need awareness and the courage to meet yourself before assuming someone else already has. What happens when your relationships feel manageable, but your mind won't stop running? When the problem isn't what's happening around you, but what's playing on repeat inside? Let's explore workplace thought traps. Why does one email ruin your whole day? Why does a quiet meeting feel like judgment? Why does feedback feel like failure and small talk feel like a test you didn't study for? What happens when cognitive distortions follow you to work and call themselves professionalism? It starts early. Before your first sip of coffee, you've already run through 5 imaginary scenarios. Did I forget to follow up? Did my manager seem distant yesterday? Should I have said more in that meeting? You walk in carrying more than your bag. You're carrying thoughts that sound like strategy, but feel like shame. This is how workplace thought traps begin. Distortions that don't wear the name distortion, because in a work setting, they often look like ambition, or humility, or accountability. But underneath, they're patterns. All or nothing thinking. If I don't exceed expectations, I've failed. Mental filtering. Only remembering the one thing that went wrong. Mind reading. Assuming your colleague thinks you're incompetent. Catastrophizing. Believing one misstep means your whole career's in danger. Should statements. I should be more confident by now. Personalization. blaming yourself for every group miscommunication. And because the workplace rewards outcomes, you may have never questioned the process. You thought, if I'm anxious, at least I'm alert. If I criticize myself first, no one else will get the chance. But over time, this way of thinking doesn't make you better. It burns you out. You spend more time interpreting tone than focusing on tasks, more time predicting mistakes than creating new ideas, more time surviving than thriving, and you forget that your value was never supposed to come from constant self-correction. So what do? We begin by separating identity from performance. You are not your inbox. You are not your to-do list. You are not the tone of one Slack message or the silence after a Zoom call. You are not behind. You are human, doing your best in an environment that rewards overextension and often punishes pause. We ask, am I reacting to a real issue or a mental habit? What would I say to a teammate feeling this way? What belief about myself is hiding beneath this pressure? And then we breathe before responding. We take the compliment. We ask the clarifying question. We send the email without rewriting it 12 times, because presence will always be more powerful than perfection. And you deserve to feel grounded at work without tying your worth to how invisible your needs are. But what happens when those needs aren't just hidden? They're turned inward, twisted into worry loops that never resolve. Let's explore how cognitive distortions fuel anxiety. Why does your mind feel like it's racing, even when nothing's happening? Why does one small worry grow into 100 invisible ones? Why does anxiety feel like truth, even when you know it's not? It starts small, a thought, a shift, a feeling in your chest that says, something's off. You don't know why, but your mind begins to search for answers, and in that searching, something changes. You stop observing, you start predicting, you stop grounding, you start spiraling. This is how cognitive distortions feed anxiety. They don't cause it, but they build the fire, they fan the flame, and they convince you that you'll only be safe once everything makes sense. So you think harder, you scan deeper, you replay conversations, you try to prepare for everything, and in doing so, you prepare for nothing but exhaustion. Because anxiety isn't just fear. It's fear plus distortion. Jumping to conclusions becomes catastrophizing. All or nothing thinking becomes, I'm not okay unless I'm fully okay. Should statements become guilt. Mental filtering becomes hypervigilance. Emotional reasoning becomes, I feel unsafe, so I must be. And your body listens. It responds to the imagined threat as if it were real. Your heart races. Your stomach turns. Your breathing shortens. Your thoughts loop as if the solution is just one more worry away. But the solution doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes from stepping back, from noticing the distortion before you follow it all the way down, from saying, wait, this is not evidence. This is anxiety. This is not logic. This is fear wearing a mask. You don't have to believe every thought just because it sounds urgent. You don't have to solve every scenario just because your mind imagined it. Anxiety says, you're not safe. Awareness says, you're not in danger. You're overwhelmed. So what do? We pause. We ground. We ask, what distortion am I believing right now? Is this a pattern I've seen before? What do I need? Not to fix this, but to soothe it? Because you don't unthink your way out of anxiety. You out-care it. You out-breathe it. You out-slow it until the nervous system remembers, I am allowed to rest now. Cognitive distortions are sneaky, but they lose power in presence. They lose grip when you stop trying to think your way to calm and start feeling your way back to now. Let's pause here and breathe. You've made it through the core distortions. You've named them. You've explored them. You've begun to notice their patterns. Now we shift. In the next arc, we move from distortion to awareness, from spiraling to softening, from naming the traps to learning how to walk around them. We begin how to catch a distortion in real time. What if the thoughts that hurt you aren't just automatic? They're also interruptible. What if you could feel the rise of a distortion and choose not to follow it? What if freedom doesn't come from fixing every thought, but from recognizing when one tries to steal your peace? It happens fast. A message goes unanswered. A mistake gets noticed. A plan begins to shift, and your mind offers a story. They're upset with me. I always ruin things. I knew it. This is going to fall apart. And for a moment, it feels real. You tense, you spin, you spiral into old patterns. But then, something new happens. You pause. You hear it. Not just the thought, but the pattern, the old voice, the predictable phrasing, the loop that starts the moment uncertainty arrives. And in that second of recognition, you catch it. Not to fight it, not to fix it, but to see it. That's where power begins. Because most distortions thrive in speed. They hijack your attention before you even notice the moment you left. But awareness slows the process down. And when you slow down, you interrupt the loop. You begin to ask, is this a distortion? Have I thought this way before? What else could be true? You're not arguing with the thought. You're stepping beside it. You're building space between reaction and reality. And in that space, you find options. You don't have to trust the thought. You can watch it rise and pass. You can say, this feels familiar, but it's not the truth. This is a reflex, not a reflection. This thought wants to protect me, but I don't have to believe it. This is catching a distortion in real time. Not perfectly, not every time, but more often, with more gentleness. It's not about silence. It's about seeing. Because thoughts will still come. Distortions will still appear. But the more you name them, the less they name you. So here's a practice. When something triggers you, pause. Take one breath. Then say, I'm having the thought that they're annoyed. I'm having the thought that I ruined everything. I'm having the thought that this means I'm not enough. It creates distance. It reminds your nervous system. This is a thought, not a fact. From there, you ask, what's the distortion? Is it mind reading? Catastrophizing? Labeling? Shoulds? Personalization? Once you see the shape, you can soften your grip. You return to your body. You come back to presence. And the thought loses power. Catching a distortion doesn't mean it disappears. It means it doesn't run the show. That's what healing sounds like. Not silence, but recognition. And once you learn how to catch a distortion, how do you begin working with it gently, without judgment? How do you unstick the story by putting it into words? Let's explore. Writing to undo thought traps. What happens when the thought that's been haunting you finally leaves your mind and lands on paper? What changes when you give your fear a voice, and it sounds less powerful than it did in your head? What if writing isn't about answers, but about turning the invisible into something you can face with open eyes? You're lying awake. The thought loops again. I said too much. I should have handled that better. They think I'm a failure. And before long, it's not just a thought. It's a mood, a posture, a weight across your chest. And even though you know, somewhere inside, that it's probably not the full truth, it still feels true. You try to reason with it. You try to let it go, but it holds on tighter. Because thoughts aren't just logical, they're emotional. and sometimes they feel too big to carry alone. That's where writing begins, not as a solution, but as a place to land, to uncoil, to witness, to see clearly what's been fogging your view from the inside out. Because when you write a thought down, you pull it out of the chaos. You take something tangled and give it a shape. You make it visible. And once you see it, you can begin to ask, is this even true? Why writing works? Writing engages a different part of your brain than thinking or speaking. It slows your thoughts. It externalizes them. It forces your inner critic to speak out loud. And sometimes you realize how small it sounds outside your head. Your brain might be whispering, I always ruin everything. But when you write that sentence down, literally put those words in ink, you look at it and go, wait, always? That pause, that brief space between belief and awareness, that's healing. Not because you erased the thought, but because you interrupted its momentum. You invited it to sit across from you instead of letting it drive the car. But what do you write? Start with what's raw, what's circling, what won't leave you alone. You don't have to make it pretty. You don't have to be profound. Try beginning with, today I notice myself thinking, right now I'm feeling, this is what I'm afraid of. The story I'm telling myself is, then go deeper. Is this always true? What's the distortion I see here? Where did this thought come from? What else might be true that I haven't considered? If a friend had this thought, what would I tell them? Writing is like holding a flashlight to the basement of your mind. You won't find monsters. You'll find echoes, old voices, unquestioned scripts, and once they're written, they don't vanish, but they lose their grip because they've been seen. Real examples. Let's take a thought. I'm behind in life. You write it down. It looks heavier than it sounded in your head. Then you ask, what distortion is here? All or nothing thinking, should statements, mental filtering. Is it true I'm behind, or am I comparing timelines? Who defined where I should be? What evidence do I have that I'm growing in my own way? How would I talk to someone I love who felt this way? Already, the narrative is shifting. Same thought. But now you're in relationship with it. You're not inside it. You're beside it. And that's where peace begins. Make writing a ritual. You don't need to write for hours. Even 5 minutes can rewire something. Try. A few quiet lines before bed. A short thought record in the morning. A midday check-in when emotions spike. A reflective pause after conflict. Let the page be a place where all thoughts are allowed to land, but not all are allowed to stay. Let it hold your fear without reinforcing it. Let it mirror your pain without amplifying it. Let it become a clearing, a reset, a return to yourself. Because healing isn't about never having distorted thoughts. It's about seeing them without becoming them. It's about saying, this is what my mind is saying right now, and I don't have to believe it blindly. Writing is the softest rebellion against the thoughts that tell you who you're not. So write. Write clumsily. Write honestly. Write like no one will ever read it, especially the parts of you that have waited too long to be seen without judgment. And when you're ready, close the page. You've done enough. But what happens when you learn to see your distortions and write them down, but still struggle to meet the moment with presence? What happens when the world feels too loud and your mind won't slow down? Let's explore the difference between distortion and awareness. Mindfulness versus mental filters. You've written the thoughts down. You've named the distortion. You've looked at your inner world, not to judge it, but to understand it. And for a moment, Everything feels clear. But then, you open your phone. Someone's voice hits differently. You walk into a room and something shifts, and without even meaning to, you're pulled right back into the loop. Not because you didn't try, but because your thoughts are still being filtered through a lens you haven't yet noticed. This is the quiet truth. Sometimes it's not the thought that traps you. It's the filter through which you see the moment. It's subtle. You might not even notice it, but it changes everything. A simple comment feels like criticism. A silence feels like rejection. A moment of uncertainty feels like a signal that something must be wrong, but none of those are facts. They're filters. And once you've written your thoughts down, you'll start to see those filters more clearly. Because now, you've slowed down enough to see the difference between what's real and what's reflex. What are mental filters? Mental filters are quiet distortions. They don't shout. They color. They tint your world in gray when it's actually full of light. And they're often built from old moments. A childhood where emotions weren't safe. A relationship where silence meant disconnection. A job where one mistake cost everything. Those experiences created lenses. Not because you're broken, but because you were learning how to survive. And now, your nervous system keeps looking for danger even when you're finally safe. That's what makes these filters so hard to notice. They feel like instincts. But there's another way to meet the moment. And that's mindfulness. Mindfulness isn't about fixing the thought. It's about noticing it before it becomes your reality. It says, this is a thought, not a fact. This is a sensation, not a threat. This is discomfort, not a disaster. It doesn't try to erase the experience. It meets it, gently, honestly, and without rush. Because where filters say, be careful, it's happening again, mindfulness says, slow down. Look again. You're here now. From writing to watching. When you wrote your distortions down, you began to catch them on paper. Now mindfulness helps you catch them in real time. You walk into that room, you feel the tension rising, and instead of following the story, you pause. You say, my mind is trying to protect me. This feels familiar, but I don't have to believe it yet. You come back to your body, your breath, this moment. That's the bridge. From journaling to being. From exploring the mind to watching it with care. Filtered versus mindful, a shift in perception. Same moment, different lens. Filtered. They didn't smile, they're annoyed with me. Mindful. I noticed they didn't smile. I feel uneasy. That might mean something, or it might not. Filtered. I'm so awkward. I ruined that interaction. Mindful. I'm having self-critical thoughts. I felt uncomfortable, but one moment doesn't define me. And over time, this kind of awareness doesn't just soothe the moment. It rewires your relationship to it. You stop reacting from fear. You respond from clarity. Gentle practice. Here's something you can do when your filters kick in. 1. Pause. Name what's happening. I'm feeling anxious. I noticed a thought jump in. 2. Breathe. Bring awareness to your body, your hands, feet, breath. Anchor yourself in now. 3. Observe. Ask gently. Is this a filter? Is my nervous system responding to now or to before? What else could this be? 4. Respond. Not react. Not fix. Just respond with compassion. This might be a filter. I can hold this thought without believing it. I can stay with this moment, even if it's uncomfortable. That's how you bring together what you wrote and what you live. Because catching distortions isn't just about journaling, it's about presence. It's about watching your mind in real time with kindness, not control. It's about slowly teaching yourself, I am not my thoughts. I am the space between them. But what if there were a structure, a gentle method to help you explore these thoughts again and again, not just in a moment of pain, but as a daily practice of clarity. Let's explore what structured reflection can offer us, what CBT can teach about distortions. What if your thoughts weren't just experiences, but patterns? What if your beliefs could be mapped, examined, softened, reshaped? What happens when awareness becomes practice, and practice becomes freedom? You've started noticing your thoughts. You've slowed down enough to hear them. You've written them, sat with them, watched them drift through your mind like clouds with names like shame, fear, judgment, regret. And now, a quiet question arises. What do I do with these patterns once I've seen them? That's where this part begins, not with philosophy, but with a framework, not to force healing, but to hold it. This is where CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, enters the story, not as a fix, but as a flashlight, a way of seeing your thinking clearly, gently, with structure. CBT, a map for thought. CBT begins with a simple idea. Your thoughts influence your feelings influence your behavior, and your behavior reinforces your thoughts. A loop, a cycle. And within that cycle, distortions can hide. You think, I always mess things up. You feel ashamed, anxious, small. So you avoid speaking up, withdraw from others, turn down opportunities. And when you do, your mind says, see, I knew I was a failure. CBT doesn't judge this loop. It just points to it and offers tools to gently step outside. The thought record, one of CBT's simplest, most powerful tools, is the thought record. It's a way to slow the spin, to bring your thoughts into daylight and ask, what happened? What did I feel? What did I think? What distortion is present? What evidence supports this thought? What evidence challenges it? What would be a more balanced thought? It's not about being positive. It's about being whole. Seeing the full picture when your mind only wants to show you the corner that hurts. Let's walk through an example. Situation: you text a friend. They don't respond for hours. Automatic thought: they're upset with me. I must have done something wrong. Feeling: worried, rejected, on edge. Distortion: mind reading, catastrophizing, emotional reasoning. Evidence for: they didn't respond. Last time they were distant, it turned out they were upset. Evidence against: they've been busy lately. They often reply late and still care deeply. No message said anything was wrong. More balanced thought: there's a part of me that's afraid they're upset, but there are also other explanations. I'll give them space and check in when I can. That shift. It doesn't erase the fear, but it creates enough distance to respond with calm instead of panic. CBT teaches us this. You can experience a thought without collapsing into it. You can witness fear without fueling it. You can hold discomfort without rushing to make it disappear. CBT gives your mind something it often lacks: a moment to breathe before reacting. It's not about being rational. It's about meeting your thoughts with curiosity instead of certainty. Because most distortions feel true. But CBT asks, what else could be true too? Try this in your own life when a painful thought arises. 1. Pause. 2. Write down the situation. 3. Write the thought. 5. Name the feeling. Spot the distortion. 6. Explore both sides. What supports this thought? What challenges it? 7. Offer a kinder, more balanced version. You're not trying to force yourself into positivity. You're inviting the part of you that sees the bigger picture. The part that knows, I can be afraid and still respond with clarity. I can believe a thought and still question it. I can feel broken and still be growing. CBT is a structure, but inside it, there's room for softness, room for the parts of you that never had a name, but always had a voice. You don't need to be a therapist to use these tools. You just need the willingness to turn toward your mind with both skill and compassion. You've named your thoughts. You've caught distortions in the moment. You've written them down. You've explored them with care. But how do you move forward when the old patterns return? How do you shift the story, not with force, but with flexibility? Let's explore reframing, a simple superpower. What if your thoughts weren't the problem, but your relationship with them? What if the story didn't need to be erased, just told from a different angle? What if your greatest clarity wasn't found in what changed outside you, but in how you looked at it inside? You can't control every thought. You can't control every feeling. You can't control every circumstance, but you can shift how you meet them. That's the heart of reframing. Not to deny pain, not to sugarcoat struggle, but to widen the lens until you can see more than just what hurts. Because most distortions are not lies. They're partial truths. They zoom in on fear while zooming out on possibility. Reframing invites you to see the rest of the picture. What is reframing? Reframing is the practice of looking at the same situation through a different mental lens. It's not saying, everything's fine. It's saying, this isn't the only way to see it. It's not a trick. It's a skill. And like any skill, it's built in moments. Small, soft moments where you choose to pause and gently ask, what else could this mean? What's another way to interpret this? What might I be missing? Because fear took the wheel? Why reframing matters? Because the brain doesn't wait for facts. It fills in gaps. And most of the time, those gaps are shaped by emotion, habit, and history. Reframing creates space between feeling and fact, assumption and reality, reaction and reflection. It's how you take back your perspective without erasing your experience. Let's see it in action. Thought. I failed that presentation. Everyone thinks I'm incompetent. Reframe. It didn't go how I hoped, but I showed up. Maybe they saw a real human, not a perfect one. Thought. They didn't invite me. I must not matter. Reframe. I feel left out, and that hurts. But their decision might not be about me at all. Thought. I should be further along by now. Reframe. Maybe growth isn't linear. Maybe where I am is not wrong, just different. Reframing doesn't take away the pain, but it gives the pain a softer place to land. How to practice reframing. Start simple. When a strong thought arises, ask yourself, 1. What am I telling myself right now? Write it down. Let it be honest. 2. What's the emotion underneath this thought? Fear, shame, sadness, insecurity? 3. Is this a distortion I've met before? Label it gently. Mind reading, shoulds, all or nothing, etc. 4. What else might be true, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it feels small? 5. What would I say to a close friend who was thinking this? And from those questions, a new perspective begins to form. Reframing doesn't mean pretending. It doesn't mean forcing gratitude when you're grieving. It doesn't mean acting okay when you're in pain. It means holding more than one truth at a time. I feel discouraged, and I'm still learning. That didn't go how I wanted, but it's not the end. I feel afraid, but I'm not in danger right now. That's not delusion. That's emotional flexibility, and that's one of the strongest forms of resilience. Slowly, gently, this becomes a way of living. You begin to notice the spiral and soften it. You catch the thought before it hardens into belief. You rewrite the story in a way that honors your pain without being ruled by it. And every time you do, you prove to yourself, I don't have to control everything to feel steady. I don't have to know the ending to keep going. I don't have to believe every thought just because it came from me. You don't escape your distortions with force. You outgrow them one reframe at a time. You've reframed the story. You've softened the spiral. But sometimes your thoughts still run in circles, and you need something structured, steady, visible, something that helps you catch what the mind tries to hide. Let's explore a tool that does just that. Thought records, tracking the invisible. What if your thoughts left a trail and you could follow it? What if the loops in your head could be seen on paper and softened by sight alone? What if you didn't need to solve every thought, just learn how to notice it sooner? You know the pattern by now. It starts with a feeling, maybe restlessness, maybe a quiet dread, maybe nothing you can name. Then come the thoughts. What did that look mean? Why can't I get it right? They must think I'm too much. You don't always catch them in time. They move quickly, one feeding the next, until it's hard to tell where the story began. That's what makes cognitive distortions so powerful. They're not loud, they're familiar. And because they echo your past, they slip into your present without warning. But what if you could slow them down? What if you could see the pattern before it takes over? That's where thought records begin. What is a thought record? A thought record is a tool from CBT, simple, structured, and powerful. It gives your mind a space to land. It helps you move from reaction to reflection, not to control your thoughts, but to track them, to understand them, to respond with gentleness instead of urgency. You take a single moment, a triggering event, and you break it down, step by step, like a trail of breadcrumbs leading back to the root. Why it matters? Because when thoughts stay invisible, they feel automatic, and truth gets tangled with fear. But once they're written down, you can begin to ask, where did this come from? What distortion is hiding here? What else might be true? What would I say to someone else who felt this way? And from that simple practice, a reframe becomes easier, a spiral becomes slower, a pattern becomes visible. Let's walk through one together. Imagine this moment. Situation. You see a friend post about a party you weren't invited to. Emotion. Hurt. Left out. Insecure. Automatic thought. They don't really like me. I'm not important. Cognitive distortions. Mind reading. Personalization. All or nothing thinking. Mental filtering. Evidence. Supporting the thought. I wasn't included. They didn't mention anything to me. Evidence against the thought. I've been close with them for a long time. Maybe it was a small group or a last-minute plan. This isn't the first time I've jumped to conclusions when I felt left out. Alternative thought. I feel hurt right now, and it's okay to feel that. But it might not mean what I think it means. Maybe I can check in or give it time before deciding the story. Outcome. Less tension, more perspective, a chance to respond, not just react. What this practice builds over time. Emotional awareness. You stop suppressing what you feel and start listening. Cognitive insight. You catch familiar patterns sooner, without judgment. Self-compassion. You learn to speak to yourself the way you'd speak to someone you love. This isn't about getting every reframe right. It's about becoming a witness to your own mind instead of a prisoner inside it. How to make it part of your rhythm. You don't need to wait for a crisis. You can track even small moments. Try doing a thought record when you feel unsettled but don't know why. A conversation keeps replaying in your head. A mistake starts spiraling into shame. You notice a familiar emotional reaction. Keep it simple. No pressure to be poetic. This is for you. Here's a journal prompt version. 1. What happened? 2. What did I feel? 3. What was my automatic thought? 4. What distortion do I see? 5. What supports this thought? 6. What challenges it? 7. What's a more balanced response? This is how you begin to rewrite the inner script, not by forcing yourself to be calm, but by offering yourself context. Because often the anxiety isn't in the moment, it's in the meaning we attach to it. Thought records give you just enough distance to remember, this is not the only way to see it. This thought is loud, but that doesn't make it true. I can feel this fully and still choose to respond gently. You don't need to eliminate distorted thoughts. You just need to learn how to see them before they become your reality. That's what tracking the invisible gives you. Clarity, curiosity, choice. You've been listening deeply. You've named your distortions. You've caught them, questioned them, tracked them. But what if you didn't just fight these patterns, but learned how to bend with them? What if healing wasn't rigidity, but flexibility? Let's explore building psychological flexibility. What if healing wasn't about control, but about capacity? What if strength wasn't how firmly you hold on, but how gently you let go? What if you didn't need to change every thought to change your relationship with it? You've written your thoughts. You've named the distortions. You've tracked the spiral. You've gently reframed what used to feel automatic. But now something deeper begins to stir. Not just the awareness of what you think, but a growing strength in how you relate to what you think. This is psychological flexibility. The soft strength of not being knocked over by your thoughts, even when they still rise. What is psychological flexibility? It's the ability to meet discomfort without needing it to disappear, to hold space for hard emotions without being swept away, to have a painful thought and still act from your values, not perfectly, not always, but more often than before. Where rigid thinking says, I feel bad, so I need to fix it now. This thought is scary, so I need to obey it. I made a mistake, so I must shut down. Flexible thinking says, this is hard, and I can still show up. This thought is here, and I don't need to believe it to keep going. I don't feel confident, and I can still take the next step. Why we lose flexibility? Because pain teaches rigidity. When we're hurt, we want safety, predictability, certainty. So we build mental walls. We seek black and white answers. We avoid anything that might trigger discomfort. But over time, those walls become cages. You stop trying new things. You avoid vulnerability. You confuse fear with intuition. Psychological flexibility isn't about removing those defenses. It's about knowing when you don't need them anymore. It's the practice of staying present without demanding comfort. The willingness to move forward even when doubt rides alongside you. What it looks like in real life. You notice your anxiety and still go to the event. You hear the inner critic and still apply for the job. You feel imposter syndrome and still press send. It's not about not feeling afraid. It's about not letting fear decide for you. You make room for the emotion without letting it steer the wheel. And the more often you do, the more trust you build with yourself. How do you build it? Gently, repeatedly, with compassion. Here are a few practices to begin. 1. Name the feeling. Without merging with it, I notice I'm feeling anxious. There's a lot of sadness in me right now. I'm having a judgmental thought. This creates separation, not suppression. You're not becoming the emotion. You're noticing it. That's the first step in flexibility. 2. Ask, what matters more than comfort right now? Not to punish yourself, but to reconnect with values. Sometimes peace comes from rest. Other times it comes from showing up scared. Ask, what does my deeper self want to move toward? What matters more than this fear? What kind of person am I becoming through this? This keeps your compass steady even when the waves are high. 3. Let discomfort ride with you. Try this image. You're driving. Your fear is in the passenger seat. Your critic is in the back. Your sadness is watching from the window. You don't need them to get out of the car. You just don't hand them the wheel. You say, I see you. You're allowed here. But I'm still going where I need to go. That's psychological flexibility. A small daily reflection. At the end of each day, you can ask, what emotion was hardest to sit with today? Did I let it drive or did I carry it? What value did I move toward, even slightly? How did I show flexibility with myself or others? Because flexibility is more than thought work. It's heart work, nervous system work, tiny act after tiny act of learning to be with what is, without giving it the final say. And what about when you're not flexible? When you spiral, when you shut down, when you collapse into the same old loop? You name that too. That was a moment I felt overwhelmed. I want to respond differently next time. I forgot I had options. Next time I'll pause sooner. That was me, surviving. And I get to keep learning. Psychological flexibility is not perfection. It's process, a dance, a returning, a soft pivot back to presence. You're not here to win against your thoughts. You're here to walk beside them with grace. But even with this strength, there's one voice that keeps showing up, the one that whispers when you rest, that judges when you try, that repeats old criticisms in a familiar tone. Maybe it's time to finally meet the one behind that voice. Let's explore, giving your inner critic a name. You've tracked your thoughts. You've softened the spirals. You've built flexibility, but one voice still remains. Not loud, but persistent. Not violent, but constant. That voice that says, you should have done better. That wasn't enough. Who do you think you are? It has followed you for years, quietly, relentlessly, and today, you finally turn toward it. We all have one. That internal voice that shows up when we fall short, when we're afraid, when we're about to take a risk. It's the voice that says, don't embarrass yourself. You're not ready. They're not going to like you. Why did you say that? You should have known better. At first, it sounds like reason, like truth, like protection. But the more you listen, the smaller you feel. That's the inner critic. It doesn't begin as cruelty. It begins as survival. And giving it a name is the first step to reclaiming your story. Why name it? Because when you name something, you create distance. You stop being the voice and start witnessing it. You realize, this thought isn't me. It's a part of me. A part that learned to be afraid. A part that learned criticism was a shield. A part that thought harshness would create safety. Naming your critic doesn't give it more power. It gives you perspective. It turns the vague whisper of shame into something specific you can address. Where did it come from? Most inner critics are formed early. Maybe it was a parent who demanded perfection, a teacher who mocked mistakes, peers who made you feel too loud, too quiet, too weird, a culture that taught you to earn your worth. And slowly, those external voices became internalized. If I'm hard on myself first, no one else can hurt me. If I expect failure, I won't be disappointed. If I keep myself small, maybe I'll stay safe. But now, that critic keeps you from your own life, from ease, from creativity, from connection. So, let's name it. Meet your critic. Imagine the voice as a character. Give it a name. Serious or silly. Not to mock it, but to see it. Maybe it's the perfectionist, the judge, the protector. Fear Voice Control Panel. Donna Old Tape, Charlie Anxious Manager Mr. Should Now ask, what does this critic sound like? When does it show up most? What is it trying to protect me from? Where did it learn this way of speaking? What does it believe it needs to do to keep me safe? You might be surprised. Underneath the harshness is usually fear, tenderness, wounded logic, how to respond. When the voice appears again, try this. Hey, I see you. I know you're trying to help, but I don't need that tone anymore. I know you're worried I'll be rejected, but criticism won't make me more lovable. You've been loud for a long time, but I'm learning how to speak to myself differently. You're not banishing the critic. You're reparenting it, teaching it that safety can come from compassion, not control. Practice the 3 voices. Try writing from 3 perspectives. 1. Your inner critic. You messed that up. Again. What's wrong with you? 2. Your curious self. That voice is here again. I wonder what triggered it. 3. Your compassionate self. It's okay. You were tired. You were doing your best. You're learning. This practice builds emotional agility, the ability to move from harshness to curiosity to care. And the more you practice, the easier it becomes to interrupt the spiral. The critic may never disappear, but it can soften. It can change tone. It can become less of a commander and more of a passenger. You don't heal the critic by silencing it. You heal it by understanding it and speaking to it the way no one spoke to you when that part was first formed. Because every harsh voice inside you was once a scared child trying to feel safe. And now, you get to be the adult who shows them another way. You've begun to change your relationship with your inner voice. But what about the voice that shows up right before sleep? The one that's quiet all day, and then fills the silence of night with noise you can't turn off. Let's explore distorted thinking at bedtime. Why is it that at night our thoughts sound different, sharper, louder, heavier? Why does the world feel manageable by day, but unbearable when the lights go out? What is it about the silence that makes our inner noise so deafening? It's late. The world has quieted, but your mind hasn't. You've turned off the lights. Your body is still, but your thoughts are not. They begin to rise, softly at first. Did I say the wrong thing today? Should I have done more? Why am I like this? And then louder, I'll never figure it out. They're probably disappointed in me. What if everything falls apart? You know it's irrational. You know it's late. You know you need rest. But the thoughts don't care. Because at bedtime, your defenses are down. The distractions are gone. And distortions step in. Why does this happen? Because cognitive distortions love quiet. They thrive in stillness. Not because stillness is the problem, but because stillness removes the noise that protected you during the day. In daylight, you had tasks, conversations, movement, noise. But now, it's just you and your mind and the backlog of emotions you didn't have time to feel. So distortions begin to speak, and they often wear familiar names. Catastrophizing. What if everything goes wrong tomorrow? All or nothing thinking. I didn't get enough done today. I'm a failure. Mind reading. They didn't reply. They must be upset. Should statements. I should have handled that better. Emotional reasoning. I feel anxious. That must mean something's wrong. The emotional landscape of nighttime night is intimate. Your nervous system is shifting into rest, but your mind doesn't always follow. Why? Because it's processing what was never spoken, unpacking what got pushed aside, trying clumsily to make sense of your day through distorted filters. And when your inner critic is still active, bedtime becomes a courtroom. Every interaction cross-examined, every decision doubted, every vulnerability reopened. No wonder it's hard to sleep. But here's the truth. These thoughts are not always invitations to solve something. Sometimes they're signals that your nervous system is overextended, that your emotional load is heavy, that you need rest more than resolution. Because when you're exhausted, your brain doesn't become more honest. It becomes more sensitive, more dramatic, more fearful. The threat response gets louder, not because there's danger, but because your capacity is low. A few gentle ways to meet these thoughts. 1. Acknowledge without engaging. Here comes that familiar worry. This is my mind trying to protect me again. These thoughts always show up at this hour. I don't need to follow them. You don't need to debate the thought. You only need to see it. 2. Name the distortion. When a heavy thought appears, ask, is this truth? Or is this fear in disguise? Is this a pattern I've seen before? Which distortion might be showing up here? Naming it creates distance. You shift from being in the thought to watching it pass. 3. Anchor in the body. Instead of getting stuck in your head, bring your awareness into the body. Feel your breath rise and fall. Place a hand over your chest or stomach. Relax your jaw, your shoulders, your hands. Let your body remind your mind. We're safe. We're here. We can rest. 4th, journal a page before sleep. Call it a brain dump, a thought release, a quiet clearing. You don't need to organize or analyze. Just write what's circling. Let the pen hold it so your body doesn't have to. 5, speak to yourself as you would a child. If you heard a child whispering, "I'm scared," you wouldn't yell or argue. You'd soothe. You'd say, "It's okay to be afraid. I'm here. You're safe. You've done enough for today." Offer yourself the same, because distorted thinking doesn't need proof. It needs kindness. What if you can't fall asleep? That's okay. Sometimes the goal isn't to sleep right away. It's to let your body feel like rest is allowed. Rest can begin before sleep arrives. It begins with softening, with letting go of control, with trusting. Even if I'm awake, I can still be gentle with myself. Let the night be a place of permission, not performance. Let it be a place where you're not asked to be productive or certain or fixed. Just present, just breathing, just enough. And maybe that's the quiet truth of distorted thinking at bedtime. You don't need to win against your thoughts. You just need to stop letting them decide who you are in the dark. You've walked through the patterns. You've met the critic. You've softened the noise of night. But there's one truth still waiting. You are not your thoughts. Not even the loud ones. Not even the old ones. Not even the ones that feel true. Let's explore you are not your thoughts. Who are you when the thoughts go quiet? When the fear softens? When the old narratives loosen their grip? What remains when the voice in your head fades and all that's left is stillness? What if the thoughts were never you, but clouds passing through your sky? Let's pause here. Not to analyze, not to fix, just to breathe. Because by now you've met the inner loops. You've tracked distortions, caught the critic, faced the nighttime spiral. You've practiced naming, writing, reframing. And still, sometimes, the thoughts come back. You're not doing enough. This will never change. You're the problem. And maybe they sound like truth. Maybe they feel like identity. But they're not. You are not your thoughts. But it's easy to forget, especially when the thoughts are constant, especially when they're harsh, especially when they've followed you for years. You've lived alongside them for so long that you've mistaken familiarity for fact. You hear, "I'm a burden. No one really cares. I'll never get it right. Something's wrong with me." And instead of saying, "That's a thought," you say, "That's me." But the truth is softer. These are thoughts your brain learned to create, patterns it learned to repeat, strategies it used to protect you. And you are more than the sum of those strategies. Thoughts are not truths. They are experiences. They rise, they fall, they pass. Some are helpful, some are outdated, some are lies that feel real because they were repeated in moments of vulnerability. Thoughts are not evidence. They're not moral. They're not destiny. They're just activity, electricity passing through a brain that's been shaped by history, biology, and memory. That doesn't mean they don't matter. It means they don't define you. Who are you then? You are the awareness behind the thought, the one noticing the storm, not the storm itself. You are the sky, vast, still, expansive, not the clouds that pass through. You are the one who paused to breathe when the spiral started, the one who wrote the thought down instead of obeying it blindly, the one who said, I feel fear, but I'll still take the next step. That is who you are. Not the noise, but the noticing, a gentle practice. When a painful thought returns, try this. Notice it. I see you. You're familiar. You're not new. Name it. That's fear. That's shame. That's a distortion. Place it outside of you. That's something my mind is saying, not something I have to believe, not my identity. Return to your breath. Inhale slowly. Exhale even slower. Let your breath remind your body, we're here. We're okay. We are not the voice. Try this mantra. This is a thought. I don't have to follow it. I don't have to fight it. I can let it pass like a cloud through the sky. Let this be your anchor, a way back to yourself every time you feel lost in the swirl. A new kind of identity. You are not. Your worst day, your biggest mistake, your loudest fear, your anxious thought, your depression loop, your childhood belief, your trauma response, your mental spiral at 2 a.m. You are the one learning to pause, the one trying again, the one noticing the pattern, the one showing up with gentleness, the one growing quietly, the one building peace, the one choosing awareness over judgment. You are not your thoughts, and you never were. Let this truth settle in. Let it become your calm, your safety, your return. Because once you know that thoughts can lie, you stop letting them narrate your life. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, what's happening in me? And how can I respond with care? You've reached the end of the core journey. But this isn't the end. Now begins the daily practice, the real-time awareness, the gentle rewiring, the quiet strength. Let's step into Arc 4, daily practice and gentle tools. Let's begin with how to catch a distortion in real time. What if you didn't have to wait until after the spiral? What if you could meet the distortion while it's still forming, soften it before it takes you under? What happens when healing becomes something you do moment by moment, in real time? You've done the deep work. You've named the patterns. You've looked backward with care, with honesty, with courage. But now, you're walking through your day, and something happens, a conversation, a delay, a glance, a tone. And suddenly, your chest tightens, your breath shortens, your mind races. The distortion begins, and you feel it pulling you in. This moment right here is where the real work lives. This is the skill, noticing the distortion as it forms, before it becomes your lens, before it becomes your story, before it becomes your truth. Why is it hard to catch in real time? Because distortions are fast. They don't ask permission. They don't knock. They just enter through emotion, memory, and fear. And unless you've slowed them down before, they'll ride the same track they've always ridden. That's why all the work you've done matters. It trains your mind to notice. Faster, softer, sooner. What catching in real time looks like, it's not dramatic. It's not loud. It's often just a pause. A moment where something rises, And instead of reacting, you breathe. You ask, what's happening in my body right now? What story is my mind starting to tell? Does this feel familiar? Could this be a distortion? You don't need to name it perfectly. You just need to notice. That alone is enough to slow the spiral. A few examples. A friend doesn't reply to your message. Initial thought, they're ignoring me. Pause. Breath. Check in. Is this mind reading? Gentle reframe. They might be busy. I've jumped to this conclusion before. You get a critical email at work. Thought, I've failed. They're disappointed. Pause. Name it. Catastrophizing. Reality check. It's one email. There's no evidence of disaster. Regulate. Breath. Ground. Respond later, not immediately. You make a small mistake. Thought, I always do this. What's wrong with me? Pause. Name it. Overgeneralization. Speak kindly. It was a mistake. That doesn't mean I am a mistake. These moments are where change lives, not in removing the thoughts, but in seeing them differently while they're still rising. Practices for catching distortions in real time, one body awareness first. Before your mind races, your body speaks. Tension in your stomach, heat in your face, clenching in your jaw, pressure behind your eyes. When you feel it, pause. Ask, what just happened? What thought followed this feeling? Often the distortion begins in the nervous system before it becomes language. 2. Use a keyword. Choose a short cue phrase to interrupt the pattern. Something like, wait, this might be a distortion. Old story? Pause first. Truth or reaction? What else might be true? This gives your brain a soft break. A moment to reassess instead of react. 3. Ground into now. Distortions pull you into the past, or project fear into the future. Coming back to the present is often enough to disrupt the loop. Try touching something near you, naming 3 things you see, placing your hand on your chest, saying softly, this is now. I am safe right now. Journal it after. If you couldn't catch it in the moment, reflect gently afterward. What triggered me? What thought did I believe? Was there a distortion in it? What would I tell myself next time? This is how you train your awareness, not with pressure, but with reflection. The real-time shift isn't perfection. It's pattern breaking. Catching a distortion doesn't always mean you stop feeling it. You might still feel the fear, still hear the critic, still want to react. But now, you're not inside the spiral blindly. You're watching it. You're breathing through it. You're making a new choice. Even if the thought is still there, your relationship to it has changed. And that is healing in motion. You've learned how to catch the distortion in real time. But what if you want to take it deeper? Not just notice, but transform it through writing. Let's explore. Writing to undo thought traps. You noticed the spiral forming. You paused. You named it. But some thoughts don't loosen just because you see them. Some traps need to be unwound, with ink, with slowness, with space. What if writing wasn't just expression, but excavation? A way to see what's been running your mind from the shadows? You've been catching distortions in real time, in the pause before the reaction, in the breath before the story takes over. But sometimes the spiral is sticky. It loops back. It drags you down. It hides under logic and tells you it's just being realistic. And when the thoughts feel too true to question, that's when writing becomes your clearest mirror. Because what you name, you can question. And what you question, you can soften. Why writing? Because the mind is fast. Thoughts blur together. Assumptions run unchecked. Patterns repeat without context. But when you write, you slow it all down. You don't just think, You see, you begin to notice the shape of your distortions, the words you always use, always, never, everyone, nothing, the voices that echo old fears, the inner critic's tone dressed up as truth, the way emotion disguises itself as evidence. Writing creates distance. It gives you a second chance to meet the moment with clarity. Start here, free writing the thought spiral. Begin with no format, no rules, just write. What happened? What did it bring up in you? What were the automatic thoughts? What were the emotions beneath them? What did you believe about yourself in that moment? Let it be messy. Let it be raw. Let it be human. You're not writing to sound wise. You're writing to be honest. Once it's out of your head, you can look at it with softer eyes. Then layer in structure. Here's a gentle journal prompt you can use anytime a thought trap shows up. 1. Trigger. What happened? Where were you? Who was involved? 2. Emotion. What did you feel in your body? What was the emotional wave? 3. Automatic thought. What story did your brain tell you? 4. Cognitive distortion. Can you spot it? Was it mind reading? Catastrophizing? All or nothing? 5. Evidence. For as against. What facts support the thought? What facts challenge it? 6. Balanced response. What would be a gentler, more complete way to look at this? 7. What do I need? What would support me now? Not to fix it, but to hold myself through it. This isn't just journaling. It's repatterning. Each word is a thread you untangle. Each question is a doorway into awareness, writing to your inner critic. Try this. Write out a full page from your inner critic's voice. Let it say what it usually says when you're vulnerable. Then switch. Now write a response from your inner nurturer. The voice that speaks with care. The one you're still learning to trust. Let them have a conversation. You may be surprised at how much power returns to you when you give your softer voice a seat at the table. Or write a letter to yourself. You can use this anytime you're caught in a distortion spiral. Dear me, I know your mind is spinning right now. I know this thought feels real. I know you're afraid it means something about you. But slow down. You are not this moment. You are not this fear. You've survived these spirals before, and you'll move through this one too. With love, the part of you that sees clearly, you don't need to win against your thoughts. You just need to stay with them long enough for your wiser voice to arrive. A few writing prompts for thought traps. Pick one each night. What belief did I carry today that didn't serve me? Where did I over-identify with a negative thought? What emotion felt louder than truth? What distortion showed up today, and what did it try to protect? If I could rewrite one thought from today, how would I say it now? This is how writing becomes your slowest kind of healing. Not by fixing, by seeing, not by pushing the thought away, but by holding it still until it softens. You've done this work quietly, gently, noticing your patterns, naming your pain, challenging your thoughts. And now, something new is forming. A calm center. A space between stimulus and response. A self that can hold distortion without becoming it. You've tracked the spiral. You've written through the storm. But what if you could meet a distortion before it even arrives by staying present in the now? Let's explore mindfulness versus mental filters. What if your thoughts didn't need to be analyzed, only observed? What if you didn't need to understand the whole pattern to choose stillness? What happens when you stop trying to outthink the distortion and simply meet it with attention? You've learned to write through the thought. You've slowed the spiral. You've reframed, tracked, and reflected. But sometimes, even with all the tools, Your mind still filters the moment through old patterns. A compliment is deflected. A pause feels like rejection. A quiet room becomes a place for overanalysis. The distortion has already colored the frame before you even notice you're looking through it. That's where mindfulness becomes something more than practice. It becomes presence, and presence becomes power. The mind as a filter. Your brain doesn't record life like a camera. It edits as it sees, it selects, it deletes, it frames. And that frame is often built from past wounds, familiar fears, subconscious narratives, distortions you've carried for years. So instead of seeing the moment as it is, you see it as it feels, which is often filtered through anxiety, shame, or self-doubt. They looked away becomes they're annoyed. I made a small mistake becomes I ruined everything. They haven't texted back becomes they don't care. This isn't weakness. This is what the mind does when it's moving faster than the present moment. What is mindfulness? Mindfulness is the act of paying attention to what's happening now, in your body, in your breath, in your environment, without judgment. Not to escape your thoughts, but to notice them before they become your reality. Mindfulness doesn't say, this thought is wrong. It says, this is a thought. It doesn't try to fix the feeling. It holds it without flinching, without chasing, without pushing it away. The difference it makes. Without mindfulness, mental filters go unnoticed. You react. You spiral. You believe every thought that passes through. With mindfulness, there's space. Between trigger and reaction, between assumption and reality, between feeling and belief, that space is where your freedom lives. You don't need to convince your thoughts to be kind. You just need to be aware enough to stop mistaking them for facts. Mindfulness in everyday moments. You get feedback at work. Your filter says, I'm failing. Mindfulness says, this is discomfort. Let's breathe. A friend seems quiet. Your filter says, they're upset with me. Mindfulness says, I don't know their inner world. I can stay present. You feel anxious. Your filter says, something must be wrong. Mindfulness says, anxiety is here. I can notice it without obeying it. A simple mindfulness practice. Try this the next time a distortion rises. 1. Pause. Stop the momentum, even for 5 seconds. 2nd, notice. What are you feeling in your body? What story is forming? 3. Name it. This is anxiety. This is fear. This is a thought about being rejected. 4th, anchor. Focus on something real. Your breath, the feeling of your feet on the floor, a sound in the room, the temperature on your skin. Respond gently. Ask, what do I need right now? Not to fix this, but to support myself through it. You're not pushing away the distortion. You're letting it pass without stepping inside. What this builds over time. Emotional distance from old patterns. Compassionate curiosity instead of self-judgment. A quieter nervous system. The ability to sit with discomfort without collapse. This is how mindfulness dissolves mental filters, not by arguing with them, but by seeing through them. When you sit in the present, distortions lose their grip, because they only thrive in moments you don't fully feel. A daily practice you can try tonight. Before bed, take 2 minutes. Ask yourself, what thoughts tried to shape my day? Which moments pulled me out of presence? Where did I pause and notice instead of react? No shame, no judgment, just awareness. Because you don't need to fix every distortion. You just need to meet them in the moment they arrive with your whole grounded self. That's mindfulness, that's clarity, that's calm. You've softened the filter, you've returned to now. But sometimes you still want something structured, something practical. a map to help guide your thinking back toward truth. Let's explore what CBT can teach about distortions. You've slowed the moment. You've softened the filter. You've started to notice the thoughts before they harden into belief. But now you ask, what do I do with them? How do I begin to change a pattern that's been with me for years? What if healing had a framework, not to control your mind, but to guide it towards something clearer? Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, isn't just a treatment. It's a way of understanding your thoughts as experiences, not identities. It teaches this core truth. You are not what you think. You are what you do with what you think. At its heart, CBT gives you tools to notice distortions, to understand their emotional roots, and to respond with care instead of collapse. Let's take a closer look. CBT is built on a simple model, but one that explains so much. Imagine a triangle. At each point, you have thoughts, emotions, behaviors. Every moment of your life is shaped by the interaction between these three. A thought triggers a feeling. The feeling shapes your behavior. The behavior reinforces the thought, and around it goes. Let's say, thought, I'm not good enough. Emotion, shame, sadness. Behavior, you withdraw, don't speak up, avoid connection. Outcome, you don't get the support or feedback that might help you grow. The result, the original thought feels confirmed. CBT helps you interrupt that loop by targeting the thought, not by suppressing it, but by understanding it, questioning it, and gently restructuring it. This is one of CBT's most powerful tools. Cognitive restructuring means taking an unhelpful thought and gently challenging it, then replacing it with a more accurate, balanced one. It's not about positive thinking. It's not about ignoring pain. It's about choosing a perspective that supports your growth instead of reinforcing your fear. Let's walk through a simple example. Original thought. They didn't text back. I must have said something wrong. Emotion, anxiety. Rejection, cognitive distortion. Mind reading, personalization. Evidence for, they haven't responded. The conversation was vulnerable evidence against. They were probably busy. This pattern of fear has happened before. No actual feedback was given. Alternative thought. I'm feeling uncertain because I shared something personal. Their silence might mean nothing about me new behavior. You wait instead of double texting. You soothe your nervous system. You return to your values. This is the shift, not from negative to positive, but from reactive to reflective. Try using this when you catch a strong thought. What happened? What did I think? What did I feel? What did I do? What distortion might be involved? What else could be true? What could I do differently next time? You can keep this near your bed. Use it during a walk. Speak it aloud during a tough moment. It's not about doing CBT perfectly. It's about learning how to pause and respond to your thoughts as the observer, not the captive. Your thoughts are habits. They're learned, repeated, and changeable. Your feelings are valid, but they're not always rooted in fact. Your behavior reinforces belief. So when you act differently, even while the fear is still there, you begin to rewrite the belief. The goal isn't to stop distortion. It's to stop letting it lead your choices. You feel anxious, and instead of spiraling, you pause to notice the thought. You hear the inner critic, and you ask, would I speak to a child this way? You assume rejection, and instead of withdrawing, you check in. You feel ashamed, and you write it down, gently reframing the old story you want to give up. But you take one small action toward your value anyway. That's CBT in motion, not in theory, but in practice. CBT gives you something powerful, agency, not over the thought, but over the response. not over the emotion, but over the interpretation, not over the past, but over the story you tell now. You won't always catch the distortion in time. You won't always find the perfect reframe. You won't always feel calm, but every time you return to the process, you strengthen your capacity. You create new loops, healthier ones, kinder ones. You teach your brain that fear doesn't have to decide the meaning. You've started to change your inner patterns. Now, let's take that rewiring further. Let's explore one of the simplest yet most powerful tools in all of CBT and beyond, reframing. Not just as an idea, but as a superpower. Next, reframing, a simple superpower. What if the problem wasn't the thought, but the frame around it? What if pain didn't vanish, but softened when seen from a new angle? What if the story didn't need to be rewritten entirely, just told through a kinder lens? This is the quiet power of reframing, not as denial, but as direction. You've been walking through distortions. You've learned to name them, to question them, to slow them down, but sometimes, even after awareness, a thought still lingers. It clings to your nervous system, echoes in your self-talk, stains the rest of your day. That's where reframing steps in. Not to erase the thought, but to reshape it, to shift its weight, to place it in a different light. Reframing is the practice of changing how you see a thought without pretending it doesn't exist. It's the art of taking something hard and viewing it through a lens that allows for growth, softness, or understanding. It doesn't say, "This isn't happening." It says, "What else might this mean? Is there a different way to hold this moment?" Because the original thought feels safe, even when it hurts. The mind prefers what's familiar, even if it's self-critical, even if it's distorted, even if it's wrong. Your brain says, "I'm not enough." They think I'm annoying. This will never get better. That one mistake ruined everything. These thoughts feel true, not because they are, but because they match your fear. Reframing interrupts that match. It offers a new possibility, one your brain isn't used to yet. That's why reframing feels uncomfortable at first. It's not fake positivity, it's unfamiliar perspective. Original thought: I failed. I embarrassed myself. Emotion, shame, withdrawal, reframe. I took a risk. I learned something I can be proud of the trying, not just the outcome. You didn't pretend it didn't happen. You just chose to tell the story from a place of self-compassion instead of self-punishment. Pain plus blame equals shame. Pain plus learning equals growth. Same event, different meaning, different emotional outcome. That's the power of reframing. It allows you to hold space for pain and possibility. Shift from judgment to understanding, soften the emotional charge. Choose a more helpful narrative. Regain a sense of choice. I was too sensitive. I was tuned into something others missed. I wasted time. I needed that time to rest and reset. I messed everything up. I made a mistake. And I'm learning. I'm falling behind. I'm moving at the pace that honors my capacity. They don't care about me. My mind fears disconnection. But I can check in before assuming these reframes aren't just comforting. They're clarifying. They return power to your hands without ignoring the weight of what you feel. Pick one thought that's been stuck in your mind. Write the automatic version, the fearful or distorted version, a kind, realistic reframe. Example: they didn't respond. They must be avoiding me because I'm annoying. They might be busy. I can't know what they're thinking, but I know I care, and I showed up with honesty. Each version opens up different feelings, different behaviors, different futures. It's not toxic positivity, pretending everything is fine, ignoring red flags, minimizing your pain. It's not about making things pretty. It's about seeing things clearly and choosing the version that serves your healing. What story am I telling myself right now? Where might I be distorting the meaning? What else could be true, even if it's just a little softer? How would I speak to a friend in this same situation? Let your reframe come from the voice you're learning to trust, the one rooted in curiosity, not fear. Reframing is not a trick. It's not manipulation. It's a skill, a tool, a form of kindness. It reminds you that your thoughts are not fixed truths. They're lenses, and lenses can change. You've begun shifting meaning. But what if you could take it even deeper? Not just with words, but with tracking. Let's explore thought records, tracking the invisible. What if the loudest thoughts weren't the ones doing the most damage? What if the beliefs shaping your life were quiet, habitual, invisible? What happens when you finally begin tracking the thoughts you didn't even know were running the show? You've slowed the moment. You've softened the filter. You've started to notice the thoughts before they harden into belief. But now you ask, what do I do with them? How do I begin to change a pattern that's been with me for years? What if healing had a framework, not to control your mind, but to guide it toward something clearer? Reframing begins with awareness, but awareness doesn't always come naturally. Some thoughts hide, not because they're clever, but because they've always been there. You don't question them because you didn't know they could be questioned. These are core beliefs, unspoken assumptions, stories passed down through years, relationships, silence. They live in the background, like wallpaper you forgot was there. And unless you slow down, they'll keep coloring your world. This is where thought records come in. What is a thought record? A thought record is a simple, structured tool for capturing, examining, and shifting distorted thinking. It's not about overanalyzing. It's about putting the invisible on the page so you can see it clearly, kindly, truthfully. Thought records slow the moment down. They make your internal experience something you can look at, not just live in. The core structure. A thought record walks you through 7 simple steps. 1. Situation. What happened? 2. Emotion. What did you feel? 3. Automatic thought. What thought came up? 4. Cognitive distortion. Can you name the trap? Evidence for the thought. 6. Evidence against the thought. 7. Balanced reframe. What else could be true? This isn't about forcing a better thought. It's about gently challenging the lens. Let's walk through an example. Situation. You sent a message and haven't gotten a reply. Emotion, anxiety, shame, overthinking. Automatic thought. They're upset with me. I said something wrong. Distortion, mind reading, catastrophizing. Evidence for, they haven't responded. I was vulnerable. Evidence against, they've taken time before. There's no actual sign they're upset. I've felt this before, and it passed. Balanced reframe. I feel anxious because I opened up. But their silence doesn't mean rejection. I can allow uncertainty without assuming the worst. In just a few minutes, you've turned panic into perspective. You've stepped out of the storm and into clarity. Why it works. Thought records. Interrupt the emotional loop. Shift attention from reaction to reflection. Create distance between you and your inner critic. Teach your brain new ways to interpret reality. Strengthen your capacity to sit with ambiguity. They make thinking tangible, which makes change possible. A few gentle tips. Keep a small journal just for thought records. Don't rush the process. One record can take 5 to 15 minutes. Use real examples from your day, even small ones. Be honest but kind. Don't worry about doing it right. You're practicing awareness, not perfection. When to use a thought record. After an emotional reaction. When a spiral starts and won't stop. when a thought feels too real to challenge, when your mood shifts for no clear reason, when an old belief resurfaces. You don't need to use it every day. You don't need to write long essays. One line of honest noticing can change the shape of your response. A healing truth. The thoughts that run your day often go unspoken. Thought records help you bring them into the light, not to judge them, but to understand them. And once you understand them, you can change how they move through you. You can pause before they take the wheel. You can remember your power, not to silence your thoughts, but to walk beside them with choice. You've been learning how to shift, how to see, how to pause. Now let's learn how to move with those thoughts without breaking, to stretch when life asks you to bend. Let's explore building psychological flexibility. What if healing wasn't about holding on tighter, but learning how to bend? What if the goal wasn't control, but flexibility? The kind that lets you stay rooted even when the weather changes. The kind that lets you move without losing who you are. You've tracked your thoughts. You've written through spirals. You've named distortions. You've reframed your pain. But what happens when the storm doesn't pass right away? When the situation can't be changed, the fear can't be calmed, the distortion won't let go. This is where psychological flexibility becomes essential. It's not about removing distress. It's about responding to it with adaptability. What is psychological flexibility? At its core, it means the ability to stay connected to your values while adjusting your thinking and behavior in response to the present moment. It's the skill of being soft and strong at the same time, not rigid, not reactive. It means letting go of black and white thinking, allowing thoughts without obeying them, staying open to discomfort, moving toward what matters even when fear is loud, holding both uncertainty and clarity. It's less about what you feel and more about how you relate to what you feel. Rigid thinking says, if I feel anxious, I can't do it. If I'm not sure, I shouldn't try. If I'm not perfect, it's not worth doing. If I'm rejected, I'm worthless. Flexible thinking says, anxiety is here, but I can still act. Uncertainty is part of growth. Perfection isn't required for progress. Rejection hurts, but it doesn't define me. Flexibility doesn't mean anything goes. It means your values stay firm even when your thoughts wobble. The 6 pillars of flexibility, from ACT, acceptance, and commitment therapy. Let's explore 6 core processes that help build flexibility. 1. Acceptance. Allowing uncomfortable thoughts and feelings to exist without trying to eliminate them immediately. 2. Cognitive diffusion. Seeing thoughts as thoughts, not truths. I'm noticing the thought that I'm a failure. 3. Present moment awareness. Returning to the now instead of living in future fear or past shame. 4. Self as context. Realizing you are the observer of your thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. 5. Values. Clarifying what actually matters to you, your why. 6. Committed action. Taking steps aligned with your values, even when it's hard. These are not goals. They're practices, gentle, imperfect, human. Let's bring it into your day. A thought shows up. I'm not ready. I'll mess this up. Old response. Avoid the situation. Stay small. New flexible response. I'm having the thought that I'll fail. I've had it before. This discomfort means I care. My value is courage, not comfort. I can take a small step anyway. You haven't silenced the thought. You've just changed your relationship to it. That's flexibility. Building flexibility is not being passive, suppressing emotion, pretending to be okay, forcing optimism, always knowing what to do. It's not about doing more. It's about doing differently, a little slower, a little softer, a little truer to what matters to you. A few questions to explore in your journal. What thought keeps trying to define me lately? What emotion have I been resisting? What value am I being pulled toward, even through discomfort? What small act could honor that value today? You don't have to get it all right. Flexibility isn't a state you reach. It's a movement you practice. And every time you return to your breath, reconnect to your values, and act with care, you strengthen the roots beneath you. You are not here to be rigid. You are here to bend, to move, to grow in ways that surprise even you. You've softened your grip on control. But what about that voice inside? The one that never stops pushing, correcting, doubting. What if you gave it a name? Let's explore giving your inner critic a name. What if the voice in your head wasn't you, but a character? What if you could step back from its judgments by giving it shape, giving it language, giving it a name? Not to mock it, but to meet it, to see it clearly so it no longer controls you quietly. You've done the noticing. You've tracked your thoughts. You've written the spirals down. You've practiced flexibility. But one voice still lingers. The one that whispers when you're tired, corrects you in front of the mirror, questions your every move, tells you you're never enough even when you've done your best. This is your inner critic. We all have one. It doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're human. But here's the truth. That voice is not your core self. It's a mental habit, often formed to protect you. And the first step to disarming it? Give it a name. Why name the inner critic? Because when you name something, you create space between you and it. You go from, I'm failing, to, oh, that's just my critic again. Naming turns the critic into a character not to ridicule it, but to recognize it. It gives you a way to respond instead of react, to observe instead of obey. Naming helps you say, this voice has been loud, but it's not the whole truth. I don't have to argue with it, but I don't have to follow it either. I see you, but I choose a different voice today. Where does this critic come from? Often from early messages. Be careful what people think. Don't mess up. Work harder. You always get it wrong. That's not good enough. These messages may have come from parents, school, religion, culture, sometimes even from well-meaning people. And the child version of you took them seriously, took them personally. So the critic was born not to harm you, but to keep you in line, to prevent rejection, to avoid shame. But now you're grown, and the critic's still using the same old tactics. It hasn't updated. You can. How to name your inner critic. There's no wrong way. Try one of these. 1. Use humor. Judge Judy, Captain Doom, Debbie Downer, the intern who thinks they run everything. 2. Use description, the perfectionist, the worrier, the shadow voice, the old teacher. 3. Use imagery, the whisperer, gray fog, the mask, static noise. You're not mocking the critic, you're identifying it. So when it speaks, you can say, oh, there you are again. How to respond when the critic shows up. Step 1, notice the voice. This feels like the critic, not the truth. Step 2, name it. This is the perfectionist talking. Step 3, acknowledge its intention. I know you're trying to protect me from failure. Step 4, reaffirm your values. But I don't need to be perfect to be worthy. Progress matters more than performance. I choose kindness over fear. Over time, the critic doesn't disappear, but it gets quieter, less believable, less powerful. Try this journal prompt. What does my inner critic usually say? What emotion follows those thoughts? What part of me is that voice trying to protect? What name would help me create space from it? What would my wiser self say in response? Write it as a dialogue if you like critic. You messed everything up. You're scared, I hear that, but I'm learning. I'm allowed to be human. Why this matters: when you name the voice, you stop confusing it with identity. You become the one who chooses, not the one who obeys. You begin to feel the quiet rise of a different voice, one that's slower, kinder, wiser. It says, you don't need to earn your worth. You're allowed to rest. You don't have to prove anything. You are not the critic. You are the awareness behind it. You've named the voice. You've softened the judgment. But there's still one place where distortion loves to hide right before sleep. Let's explore distorted thinking at bedtime. Why does your mind wait until nightfall to bring everything forward? Why does the quiet feel so loud? Why do the smallest fears become the biggest truths when the lights are off and the world is still? Let's talk about the distortion that lives in the dark, the thoughts that rise when you're finally alone with yourself. You've moved through your day, you've functioned, you've smiled, you've pushed through. And then, the room gets quiet, the phone is down, the lights are low. The world has stopped asking for your attention. And that's when it begins. The thoughts you kept at bay all day start creeping in. Did I say too much? I wasted the whole day again. They were probably annoyed with me. I should have handled that better. Your brain starts playing reruns of the day's smallest moments as if they were disasters. This is bedtime distortion, the nighttime version of your old cognitive habits, made louder by silence and fed by exhaustion. Because your brain is tired, your emotional filters are worn thin, the distractions are gone, and your mind, searching for something to process, turns inward. The protector in you starts scanning the day for signs of threat, error, or regret. It thinks it's helping. It's trying to make sense of the chaos, trying to prepare you for tomorrow, trying to keep you from repeating the same mistakes. But instead of clarity, it often brings overgeneralization, catastrophizing, should statements, emotional reasoning, mind reading. Because your defenses are down, the distortions feel truer than ever. I never get anything done. Everyone's moving forward but me. They didn't text back. I must have upset them. If I don't figure this out, everything will fall apart. None of these are facts. They are exaggerations magnified by fatigue. You wouldn't believe them at 9 a.m., but at 11:30 p.m., they feel like prophecy. That's the trap. First, don't fight it. Fighting creates tension. Tension keeps you awake. Instead, notice, name, nurture. First, notice. Ah, here it is, got my bedtime spiral. 2. Name the distortion. That's catastrophizing. That's black and white thinking. That's emotional reasoning. 3. Nurture yourself through it. This thought feels big right now because I'm tired. I don't need to solve this tonight. I can revisit this with a clearer mind tomorrow. This is not avoidance. It's wisdom. 4. Write it down, then let it go. Keep a notepad by your bed. When the thought hits, write. Here's the thought. Here's how it makes me feel. Here's when I'll return to it, after sleep. This externalizes the fear and gives your mind permission to rest. 5. Create a mental safe phrase, something like, nothing urgent right now. This is just nighttime noise. I'll think clearly tomorrow. Thoughts are loud. I am not in danger. Repeat gently, slowly, until the nervous system softens. 6. Body before brain. Breathe. Place your hand on your heart. Stretch gently in bed. Feel the blanket, the pillow, the softness. Return to the now. Because distortion pulls you into fear, presence brings you back to safety. You don't need to think better before sleep. You need to feel held, reassured, supported. If the thoughts come, you can meet them with curiosity, not panic. Let them pass like dreams before dreams. Not everything you think at night deserves your belief, and not everything loud is true. You've done enough today. You've grown, even in silence, even through spiral. You don't need to earn rest. You're allowed to sleep, even if something's unresolved, even if the thought hasn't been solved, even if the fear is still whispering. You are safe to rest, even if your mind isn't completely quiet yet. You've seen the distortions, met the critic, survived the spiral. But as we bring this long journey to its final breath, we ask the quietest, most important question of all. If you are not your thoughts, who are you? Let's close with, you are not your thoughts. You've walked through every distortion, named the inner voice, breathed through spirals, reframed pain, returned to presence, felt fear, felt grace, and now you arrive here with one quiet, final truth. You are not your thoughts. Your thoughts are real. They happen. They rise like breath. They fall like weather. They form stories. They echo voices. They carry memories, meanings, and metaphors. But they are not you. They pass through you. They visit you. They try to define you. But you are not what they say. You never were. We grow up believing, if I think it, it must be true. If I feel it, it must be real. If the thought is loud, it must be mine. But this is where suffering begins, because thoughts are not truth. They are projections. They come from childhood scripts, unspoken fears, cultural noise, survival instincts, old shame, future dread. They are not your soul. They are not your essence. They are just thoughts. You are the one who notices. You are the one who watches, the still presence underneath the noise, the breath beneath the belief, the space where stories pass but none of them stay forever. You are not the distortion. You are the clarity that sees it. You are not the critic. You are the compassion that answers. You are not the spiral. You are the anchor inside it. If you are not your thoughts, then you are not your worst memory, most anxious moment, deepest self-doubt, harshest internal sentence, longest silence, most vivid shame. These are things that happened within you, but they are not who you are. Who you are is what remains when the thought passes. And it always passes. Try saying this the next time a painful thought arises. This is a thought. It's loud, but it's not law. It's here, but it's not me. I can notice it and not follow it. Because when you step back from the thought, you return to yourself, the deeper self, the kinder one, the one who knows. Not everything the mind says must be obeyed. The mind's job is to think. Your job is to choose. Your mind will tell stories, some helpful, some hurtful. That's its nature. But you are the one who gets to pause, to breathe, to decide which story you live inside. You can let the thought come, let the emotion rise, let the spiral start, and still say, I see you, but I don't have to follow. Tonight, when a thought rises in the quiet, when your brain reaches for noise, when your critic speaks up, remember, you don't need to fix the thought. You don't need to silence it. You don't need to argue. You can just notice. Return to the breath. Let it pass like a cloud across a black sky. The thought doesn't define the sky, and neither does the fear define you. And so, we end here not with all the answers, but with something better. Awareness, compassion, tools, and the simple, quiet truth that you now know how to return to. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness underneath them, the stillness between them, the witness, the presence, the soft pulse of aliveness that never needed fixing. Thank you for walking this path. Thank you for meeting your mind. Thank you for staying. Rest well. The distortion may visit again, but this time you'll know how to greet it and let it pass.